You're watching Medfield TV.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the September 28th meeting of the Board of Selectmen. What did I say? September. Not sure why I said that. Thank you. The May 28th Board of Selectmen's meeting. Remind everyone that this meeting is being videotaped. And as a result, if anyone from the audience has things that they'd like to say, we'd ask you to get the microphone because we need the microphone in order to pick up the audio feed for the broadcast through Medfield Cable TV. Before we start, I'd like to take a minute here. In light of the fact that this past weekend was Memorial Day, I'm going to suggest that we take a moment of silence to remember those service members who have fought to protect our country. And I would also, in light of the fact that we'll be unveiling Officer Daniel McCarthy's monument in front of the Public Safety Building on Saturday, I'd like to extend that to keeping in mind the public safety officers who have given their lives, and especially Officer McCarthy. So. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just a point, but it's Sergeant McCarthy.
Thank you. Daniel McCarthy.
Yep.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I think let's see, announcements we have. Again, the unveiling of that monument is June 1st at noon in front of the Public Safety Building. I know there's been some curiosity about what has been covered up in front of the Public Safety Building over the past week. That's what it is. But the ceremony will take place at noontime on Saturday. And then with that, our first item of business was to have the auditors come and brief us on the FY18 audit. But in their absence, we'll go ahead and begin the discussion with our own accounting staff, finance staff, to kind of go over what your best shot at what you believe the auditors were going to cover.
I think that the
Can we get the microphone?
right here.
Oh, you have it. There you go. Okay.
Town finances over fiscal 18 were as predicted. It changed a little because the entire OPEB liability showed up on the balance sheet. So, and we knew that for the past 2 years that would happen. And other than that, the reserves have dropped a little because we spend some of the reserves each year to offset the budget in order to keep the tax rate down. And I think, other than that, I think we're proceeding as normal, as usual. The town finances, I think, are still in good shape.
So one specific question. I'd have the OPEB liability get added to our balance sheet. When we discussed that last year, there was some possibility that the category that it would be dropped to is one that would not have the full impact that other normal debt might have. Is that the case?
I think in a Moody's interview, they would take that into consideration.
Okay. And the amount that dropped was based on what?
Well, the full OPEB liability shows on the balance sheet now, whereas before it was only the increment each year.
Using the calculation, this is not using the 7% return calculation, this is using the calculation that GASB kind of specified for people that were still behind.
Yes, yeah, we're partially funded, we're not fully funded.
I know. Basically, the calculation of that liability is on the high end for what?
Yes, and we are due for a full OPEB study again this year.
Okay.
Joy, we're funded about $2.5 million or something of that sort
Yes.
out of our 41 million
Yes.
liability?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
Did the change in the OPEB calculation process that was put in place change what that liability was?
It only reduces by what we fund each year plus the accumulated interest. So the fund has done pretty well.
No, I knew that, but when they went to the new guidance or the new requirement, there was, they said they would look at cash flows. There was supposed to be a different methodology on how they were calculating liabilities. A, have they done that? And B, did it have if they did it have any impact?
I'd have to, I don't have the most recent OPEB study with me.
Okay.
That's provided for by Larry Stone of Stone Consultants.
All right, that's probably something we should pick up at a OPEB trust fund.
Okay.
What else?
So Mr. Chairman, I wanted to go through the management letter. I don't know if you have other stuff to cover.
I'm fine.
All right. So, do we have copies of the management letter? Somebody other than me?
Everyone should have a copy.
Okay.
Of the financial.
So just starting on the disaster recovery plan, the auditor stated that it was this issue was resolved, but can you just take us through what we've done and where we are, and then what that plan will do?
So as most of you know, back in 2016, we had a major data hack regarding Bitcoin, and we were held for ransom for about 2 weeks before that was resolved. At that time, the auditors suggested we have a full disaster recovery plan, which we were drafting at the time that the data hack happened. We put that in place, and part of the recommendation was to take all of our software and have it hosted outside of the town hall, which we did, except for one piece of software that it's just not feasible to do that. Unfortunately, during 2017, we lowered a firewall to let that company access the software, and we experienced another data hack at the same time. And that, unfortunately, required the assessor's office to recreate 2 months' worth of work. The Bitcoin that they were demanding in ransom went from our normal $600 that we had in 2016 to $20,000. So obviously, we were not going to pay that, and unfortunately, the assessors had to reperform all of that work. At that time, we hired an outside company to come in and do a full information technology security audit, which they just completed earlier this year. And part of that was identifying our weaknesses, identifying our strengths, working on fixing those, but also we're running a full cybersecurity education for all of our staff. Most of these data breaches occur when you click on an email or a phishing email, so we're rolling out a whole program for all of our staff on a monthly basis to experience what those are. So we resolved
Try
that.
to trick them into clicking on the phishing emails.
We are.
yeah.
But before they get those emails, there's a series of videos and trainings that they're required to do every month. So we're trying not to intentionally trick people, but just constantly make them aware of how things are happening. And we know they're occurring. Actually, Georgia got one this week, and so did Yvonne, asking to change my direct deposit information. It was not an email I sent, nor was it one that we generated out of the security thing, but everybody seems to be on high alert, so the training is starting to work. Part of what we also asked the outside security firm to do is update all of our protocols in our disaster recovery plan. So we have a full updated plan as of 2018. We don't post that anywhere. Obviously, the IT office shares it with our financial staff, but we don't share that with anybody else, obviously for security reasons. So as of now, we've resolved that.
And how often going forward under the policy will this be audited, tested, all that sort of stuff?
They're tested, the IT staff is testing it on a daily, if not.
Okay. What about from
hourly.
another outside auditor update?
We haven't determined the next time we would do an audit. I would say within 2 to 3 years. We have put money in the IT budget to keep them on a retainer if necessary.
Christine, you're saying that message that came through for your direct deposit was not an intentional spoof, it was actually
No,
a bona fide attempt?
It was an attempt. We can experience anywhere from 10 to 16,000 attempts a week of people trying to hack our systems.
Really?
So if any town employee, a teacher, a DPW worker clicks on the wrong thing, then we're at risk?
Correct.
Okay.
Part of why I ask that is because I think my fellow selectmen will also maybe have noticed that we're getting emails from people offering various town services. I've ignored all of them because anybody that's marketing to the town by sending emails to 3 selectmen is inherently as suspicious as the people who try to sell me services on my business. But there's been a marked increase from my perspective in the last, I don't know, 6 months, where all of a sudden, and it's a little hard to tell whether it came from the Mass Municipal Association. Some of the stuff seems legitimate. It's just, it doesn't seem like a legitimate way to be marketing your services, to send emails to selectmen directly about how about signing a contract.
Well, and part of that issue is all your emails are listed on the town's website, so
Yeah.
we may need to, I know the school committee just did it recently, investigate whether or not you want to have town-issued emails and have us manage the security on that end of it.
I also have something to add to that. In lieu of those emails that happened a couple of weeks ago, I will be letting everybody know, or all employees know, that if they want to change anything with their direct deposits, they'll have to come and do it in person, that we will not honor any emails concerning that, for our safety and theirs.
That's all I have on that one.
Plenty.
Yeah. Fraud risk assessment.
Right, Joe, do you want to?
This is the policy.
This is
that
the
we
policy,
have.
you're reviewing it
Okay.
tonight, but Joy can explain, because that came out of her department.
Yes, a draft was typed and given to the town administrator for the selectmen's review. And maybe we could work on that this summer before the next audit.
They're reviewing it this evening. Do you want to just give them the background of why they would need to adopt it?
It's a requirement, and so it's, if we don't adopt a fraud risk assessment, we'll be written up on it every year. It's an audit requirement.
And how long have they been telling us to do this?
Pardon me?
How long have the auditors been telling us to do
Years.
this? Okay. So we're gonna do it this year.
Yes.
All right. On the employee reimbursements, this, as I understand it, this is a Parks and Recreation employee who is using a personal credit card to make bona fide purchases of goods and services on behalf of the town.
Correct.
It's obviously a concern because you're using a personal credit card. And so it looks like they've noticed this, it's a problem. I don't see a solution here. So what is the proposed solution to this problem?
We'll work with him. I feel that many of the companies he deals with, he could create an account first, before, so that the town could be billed, invoiced directly.
So I talked to Kevin, and actually I've been talking to some other town administrators about this, and I know Joy and I disagree about this, but most towns deal with this, but with a town-issued credit card, which also goes to the issue they talk about earlier in that paragraph, that by allowing an employee to use their personal credit card, we don't know if that employee actually then returns the item. So with a town-issued credit card, obviously, we'd be monitoring purchases and returns. I know Jeff and I have been talking about this as an issue in the school department as well. Most other towns that we've talked to have a town-issued credit card to deal with this. Kevin specifically cannot set up an account with, say, AMC Movie Theater. They won't set up an account and bill us for that. And that's one of the programs they use for the campers in the summer.
So what's the issue with having a town-issued credit card?
There was a department that had one before, and it ended up earning interest charges and late charges on it.
Okay.
And so we made a decision to close it.
Okay. I mean,
I think that the state also considers it unauthorized debt, having credit cards.
how about a debit card then? I mean, if that's true, I mean, it sounds like other towns have town-issued credit cards. And so I think maybe we should figure out, my view is we ought to figure out how they do it and avoid getting in trouble with the state if it's unauthorized debt. I mean, I think the risk of, I mean, if you have an employee who's not properly using a town credit card and incurring interest, you can deal with that, however you want to deal with it. I think there's a much greater risk in having somebody put charges on their personal credit card than having a town-issued credit card that we control and can shut down at any time.
I think it will also cut down on the number of reimbursements that you have to issue through the vendor warrant to all
Right.
the employees.
Right. I mean, it seems to be a cleaner.
Yeah, I would think the same thing unless there's some reason why a debit card doesn't work right. The other alternative is for the town to issue credit cards, but to have the town pay the bill. I think the issue is, I worked with a company that we had this issue, with people have their own credit cards, and the company paid the bill, but the company didn't pay the bill until they'd gotten the expenses, and you probably can't do it that way. You kind of need to, you know, you have to pay the bill, and then the employees have to substantiate the expenses after the fact, which can be, it can open up a vulnerability if there's a mischarge in there. But that might be the other way to do it, where the interest expense shouldn't be. Either that, or else give people in the business the credit card, but we have a policy that says you need to pay it on time, and you don't get reimbursed for interest expenses that you incur because you're sloppy with the credit card. I don't know if that.
I think the way we've seen setting it up, it would be the town would issue, we'd have a credit card issued to the town, and the town would be responsible for paying it, not the individual employee.
Yeah.
I think it's cleaner to do it that way.
Yeah, that would be my view.
And internally, we can work out the semantics, you know, who's responsible for reconciling the monthly credit card bill. And I think every department head, you know, being a department head, would be able to submit whatever they've charged on that credit card to the accountant's office.
Okay. The documentation of internal controls over federal awards. So this is another policy that we're looking to adopt, or that's currently being reviewed. Who is it being reviewed by?
The school committee is reviewing it
From
now.
the school department, it's for federal grants, and that has been emailed to the auditors, and they'd like the auditors to take a look at it.
Jeff or Michael, anything to add to that?
As soon as the auditors give us the okay, because we actually hired a consultant to write that for us,
Okay.
the school committee will adopt it and then the selectmen have to adopt it.
And our federal grants are almost all school grants. Right? I don't think we have any federal town grants other than
No, they,
occasionally we get the disaster.
well, I was gonna say, we get the
relief,
MEMA
snow
reimbursement,
and
which
ice,
they
or-
consider a grant.
Yeah, okay. All right, so it looks like that's in process. Then on the school grant management, what was this, I mean, read the issue, what is described here, but what was this about?
So that was the 2017.
Just give Michael the microphone, please.
So that was 2017, that's been resolved. We had an interim student service director at the time, and we had to make journal entries due to the costs were charged to the wrong grants. So we had to go in and make and adjust those to make sure that they were charged to the correct grants. So that's where they said that there was journal entries that were made. Those were made to make sure that we were reflecting the correct cost to the correct grants.
Okay.
And then I think there was, and that's why there was that general ledger that they talked about in here.
When I read the description here, I couldn't figure out if they were talking about different grants or if it was just a writing issue. But in the second paragraph of the prior year comment, it says that one of the grants over-reported expenditures which were unexpended and should have been returned to the state. And then the next paragraph, it talks about the school department returning funds back to the state because the funds are not spent in accordance with the grant agreement. So are they talking about different grants there?
So
Or,
those two, so we have two grants for special education. Those are the two grants that we're
and
talking
so the
about.
money was actually returned to the state?
Correct.
All right. I think it's just, I think it's the way they wrote. They said should have been returned to the state, suggested that it wasn't.
It was returned
It
to
was
the state,
returned.
yes.
Okay. And we have we changed policies or procedures on this, or was this more of a personnel issue? And we have
That was
changed
more a personnel issue.
Yeah.
So, because it was resolved, as you can see, and in 2018, there was no findings.
You got a different person to do this, and
Correct.
it worked out better. Okay. No? Anything else? And my last question is on the investment policy and the collateralization agreement. I confess, I don't remember, is this an agreement that we signed?
No,
Or
it's
is
an
this-
agreement that the treasurer signs with the bank.
Okay.
So Rockland Trust is our main depository bank.
Mm-hmm.
We have probably 23 accounts with them.
Mm-hmm.
And usually, at the end of the fiscal year, I usually monitor to see how much money is in there,
Right.
so that I can move around, because I know June 30th is obviously the year end, and that's what counts. And June 30th of 17, I didn't move that money around, so, I realize it on July 1st. And I think in order to protect the town, the collateralization is the best way to go. It's a little bit less of an interest, not much, maybe like not even a quarter of a basis point, but it's certainly a protection for the town.
And what is
that
it?
was- The collateralization just means that you're covered. FDIC-DIF, you're
So it's
covered.
essentially extra insurance.
It's extra insurance, exactly, yeah.
So it's not collateralized as some sort of
Correct,
asset.
and it, like I said, it comes off of your interest, it's just a lower rate of an interest, which is really, it's very small. And this is really the only bank that it affects, because it's our depository bank, and it includes student activities, it's our main depository with all fees. And on June 30th, it's hard because a lot of the revenue comes in on June 30th. Your park and rec camps are all in there too, our onlines. And I think this is the best protection, and this is the only collateralization agreement that we have. The auditors do frown upon on too many collateralization agreements, because obviously you're reducing your interest.
So is it essentially like an extra insurance
It's
premium that's
protection,
paid
sure,
to the
absolutely.
FDIC on
Yeah.
top of the
It's extra
statutory?
protection, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So if the bank were to fail, it's just extra work for us to get our money through the collateralization agreement, but we are guaranteed 100% of it.
And George, you said the cost of that is 1/4%?
It's not even, I can
Oh,
double
okay.
check, it does change every 2 or 3 years. It's very small basis points,
Yep.
but again, it's the protection is there,
And the alternative would be to move that money to other banks
yes, oh yeah.
within the FDIC limit. All right. And that would just probably create more work and friction to do that.
It does, yeah.
So is the collateralization on the amount of the balance above and beyond what's not covered under FDIC? So there's
Correct.
the core that's covered without
Correct.
anything, and then you
And
have
then
to.
anything above it, correct, yes. And what I usually do when the auditors come in too, because they're able to see other communities, and I probably will have to update my investment policy, only because we're bringing so much more in, especially after our overrides last year, we're bringing so much more in. So obviously our bank balances are a little higher. So I may have to adjust that insurance, that investment policy and change those percentages. I'll have to take a look at that when they come in this week.
So Georgia, it looked to me like there was about 20 million, I'm sorry, of like working money that the town has in the bank at any given time. Is that right? Or am I just reading the report? I'm reading the reports wrong, obviously, from your face.
I'm not sure what report you were reading it from.
It was in one of these somewhere.
I
I
think
mean,
probably
I- I can't remember how much cash was in the bank on June 30th of 2018.
Oh, well, so it varies, obviously, of course, but on a sort of a regular basis, if you were ever to estimate what it is it 5 or is
It
it
can
10?
depend. I mean, on June 30th of 2018, it's probably not that high. But if you ask me what the cash balance is on, on December 31st, it's probably a little higher. It's all cyclical. It depends on your tax dates, when your taxes are due.
Yeah.
It depends,
Is there a range that it fluctuates
June 30th
between?
is not very high because we've expensed a lot on our teacher payroll, our summer payroll. It varies. It varies on the expenditures that come through, the revenue that comes through, water and sewer bills that come through. It depends. It depends whether or not we've issued debt and we have the bond proceeds, as an investment. Depends if I've reimbursed the general fund with money from the trust funds that have been authorized at town meeting. So it varies. It can vary. But I do a monthly cash report. So I am able, I know how much cash is in the bank,
Yeah, okay.
on a daily basis.
It just kind of surprised me, I guess, because I'm used to thinking in terms of the revenues and expenses on the town budget, and those are so close. I mean, just a couple million apart. And it didn't occur to me that we might have had 10 million or 20 million in the bank.
Yeah, I think last month I had 14 million in the bank.
Yeah, great.
But again, it varies. It depends on what your vendor warrants are. I mean, your payrolls are usually $1.3, $1.4 million every 2 weeks. Your vendor warrant can average from $1 million to $2 million every week. So obviously we are a municipality, but we are a business. We do have our revenues that come in,
Yep.
a steady flow of revenues, which I'm thankful for. But we also have a steady flow of expenditures that go out, weekly as well.
So can I just ask another question that's sort of, I think, triggered by something that I think Joyce said about the rate of return on the OPEB money? Most of the stuff that we seem to invest, we can't get in. I always think in terms of college investments, because I was on a college board for 25 years, and having an endowment, and what's the rate of return on the endowment? And you're looking at much better returns than we get on the 19 million that we had from the school building assistance that we just put in the bank at like almost no interest at all, apparently, because we had to. But are there things like the OPED that we can actually get a decent rate of return on? I think that's what I heard you say, Joy.
Yes, that's invested through the state,
That's through PREP.
yes.
Through that's the pension, the state pension company group. Yeah,
I think if you look at the asset breakdown for that, it's similar to what you see in college endowment. It's a mix of bonds, private equity.
Yeah, they seem to do a good job.
Yeah.
But we're just not allowed to, there's a lot of our monies that we're not allowed to invest like that. Because it has to
Our
be,
general fund monies, obviously for security reasons, cannot be invested in bonds and stock and
things that'll
rather than
change in
CDs.
value.
Right, exactly. You know, if I put my treasurer's hat on and you're talking trust funds, you know, then you can get a little bit more savvy. And because those monies are invested for a long-term purpose, whereas your general fund is not invested for a long-term purpose. You need that money readily available for your expenditures.
Yeah, and that's what happened with Orange County and all those people that invested in, whatever they're called, swaps and,
Exactly.
yeah.
Just a little deeper on the investment policy, actually, I want to go through the collateralization first. The current investment policy allows you to have 5% unsecured in the balance, according to.
5% of the institution's assets.
Right.
Right, no more than.
When you collateralize, do you collateralize that 5% plus anything above the 5%, or do you let that 5% remain uncollateralized and unsecured?
I'm collateralizing the balance that the town has with the bank,
Over and above what? No, what?
over and above the FDIC DIF.
Okay, so that what I'm getting at is that 5%, which is unsecured, would also be collateralized.
Correct.
What's the impact if you change the policy?
If I change it to higher than 5%? Again, it's gonna depend on what the institution's assets are on that specific day on June 30th.
So where I'm going with this is that right now the policy is 5%. The example here in the letter
Yeah.
was a balance of 23%. So if you move toward collateralization, and the collateralization covers everything that's not secured, my question is, what difference does the policy mean what difference does the policy make if we have a policy that sits on top of it that's we collateralize everything above what the FDIC limit is? I'm not challenging, I'm just trying to understand how this works. If we do collateralize everything above the FDIC limit, does an investment policy that allows us to have an unsecured amount mean anything?
Well, obviously, the investment policy is set not to invest too much in one bank.
I'm just talking about this 5%.
Okay, I'm
If I'm
sorry,
reading
I'm
this
not
right-
understanding
I
what
think
you're
I
asking
think
me.
you're each talking about something different.
I think we are.
So the 5% is, that you can't be more than 5% of Rockland Trust's
Right.
deposits.
Correct.
Oh, I thought it was 5% of our assets.
No.
Not more than 5% could be unsecured.
I can't have no more than 5% of Rockland Trust assets on June 30th.
And I'm sure we're not even close to that.
Absolutely not.
Wish we were.
Well,
I understand your confusion because
well,
of the way this is
so the
written.
thing that's
It
confusing,
makes it seem like the 23% is related to the 5%.
that's what
But it's
confuses,
not.
that is, okay.
It's not.
Yeah.
So this
Separate
thing,
thing.
so basically, the investment policy change would simply allow it, why are you changing the investment policy at all? If we're not anywhere close to 5%,
Not the 5, the 30. The 30 represents the municipality's cash. The 5 represents the Rockland Trust cash.
okay, so you'd like to be able to keep more than 30%,
I'm not sure. I'd have to take a look at it.
okay? Had we exceeded that in this,
In June 30th of 18,
we did,
we did, which is why we collateralized it.
okay,
Correct.
okay.
And that's why I take
I
a
got it.
look at it with them every year that they come in, and then if I need to adjust it, I can adjust it.
Okay. Mike was right, I confused the 5.
That's
and the
okay.
3. Got it.
Right, because
Thank you.
it's
Yeah,
that.
yeah, it's coming, it's sinking in slowly here. Okay.
It is confusing, I apologize.
I just had one other question. You have one question? The only question I had was, if you look on the statement of net position under the basic financial statements, this is another OPEB question. And under deferred inflows of resources, there's a reference to deferred inflows related to other post-employment benefits. You wanna look at,
That could be based on basic life.
what is that? I highlighted the line.
other post-employment benefits. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, I was trying to tie it, I couldn't tell if that was a projection of future imputed income from the trust fund, or is that actual cash that will come in from something?
I'll have to get
Just
back to
figure
you.
it out, yeah, okay, that's fine. That was my last question.
We're within 3 minutes of being on time, and completing this discussion.
There we go. And we didn't even need the auditors
We
to do
did,
it.
well, at least as far as we know, we did.
Well, I hope we don't get charged for this meeting with the auditors.
Would you like us to reschedule it then?
They can watch the video, and if they have anything else to add, send us a note.
Okay. With that, I guess we're finished with our 6 to 7 PM discussion with the auditors. Do we have Chief Garrett here?
Yes.
The first item of business was to swear her in as police chief. There she is. There's Carol.
I saw Carol.
Carol was, there she is, she's in the back, okay. For a minute there, I'm reading the item, and I didn't finish reading it, so I don't really know how we swear anybody in, but it says by the town clerk, so this is, thank goodness.
We're getting a microphone here, Carol.
I state your name,
I, Michelle Garrett,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully and impartially
that I will faithfully and impartially
perform the duties of the office I've been appointed to
perform the duties of the office I've been appointed to
in accordance with the town bylaws,
in accordance with the town bylaws,
town charter,
town charter,
and the general laws of the Commonwealth of Mass, so help you God.
and the general laws of the Commonwealth of Mass, so help me God. Thank you. Although we have ALS here, so. Right in here. There you go. Right next to my heart. Thank you.
Where it belongs. Nice job, Murphy.
Your newest police recruit enjoyed her march yesterday, so.
There you go. We're glad she was there.
Yep. Well, thank you. I won't hold up your meeting any
Oh,
longer.
you can come over here and shake our hands, come on over here.
Try not to stop myself.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Christine. Thank you. All right, you guys get back to that fun stuff.
Thanks for coming, Murphy.
All right, folks, it's all downhill from here.
Joy, hold on one
It looks like our next item of business is Sarah talking about the hazard mitigation plan. Take it away, Sarah.
Never mind. We're good. I'm gonna move so you can see this over my head.
Sarah Raposa, Town Planner. I wanted to introduce Darcy Schofield from MEPC. You know Darcy because she presented at your February meeting. And this is a two-part presentation. Darcy's actually going to do the first 2 slides, and then I'm going to jump back in for a few slides, and then Darcy will take over again. So you can start, and then just use that. It's hooked up to this computer.
Good evening. Thank you for having us here today. I'm glad to be coming back with Sarah to do this presentation to wrap up some planning work that we've been doing with the town of Medfield. So tonight we are doing, as you may recall, we've been working on the town's municipal vulnerability preparedness and natural hazard mitigation plan. 2 separate grants, 2 separate projects that are really, we've worked together with Sarah and a core team of a number of dedicated individuals to align this effort to look at both extreme weather events and natural hazards based on historic incidences and what we can expect to look for in the future with climate change. So we're doing those both together to create an integrated and aligned approach to ensuring that Medfield becomes a more not vulnerable, to become a more resilient community. So tonight what we're going to do is Sarah's going to present the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, just to summarize the work that we've done to date, and present this, our report, the summary of findings. Then I'll come back and talk to you more about our natural hazard mitigation plan update. This is our second of a public session that's required for this planning effort. And we'll go over timeline and next steps.
So last year we received the 2 grants, or it's actually 1 grant in 2 parts. One was for the town to undertake a municipal vulnerability preparedness plan, and then the state actually gave us an additional pot of money, up $48.75, which covers the town's non-federal share of the hazard mitigation plan. Because of the work overlaps, we're able to get that from the state as well. By doing this work, the town is going to be eligible to apply for MVP Action Grant funding. We will keep track of the progress that we're making with this plan over the next year so that we can continue to report on this work. Darcy prepared a lot of really interesting scientific findings for the town. So I'm going to sort of give the overview here. The reason why I'm doing this is because it's a requirement of our MVP grant for a member of the core team to present these findings to you rather than our consultant, who would no doubt do a much better job than I am going to do. But generally, in the past 5 years, Massachusetts has experienced increasingly more frequent and severe weather events, record-breaking snowfall in 2015, an extensive and severe drought in 2016, the warmest year on record in 2017, and 4 nor'easters in 1 month, and flooding comparable to the blizzard of 1978 in 2018 are just some examples. The fall of 2018 had the greatest amount of precipitation since 1890, when precipitation was first recorded. Climate change is not imminent, but affecting the people in cities and towns of the Commonwealth today. The workshop on January 31st brought together community members and town staff to bring local knowledge and expertise together to follow a community resilience building workshop model where participants evaluate strengths and vulnerabilities of residents, infrastructure, and natural resources, create an action plan to protect citizens, neighborhoods, and businesses, and prioritize climate actions most important to Medfield.
Can I back you up?
Sure.
Might as well use this as an education opportunity. On that prior one, we're saying that sea levels have risen 11 inches on the East Coast since 1900.
That's from a Boston Harbor tide gauge, so it's 11 inches since 1880.
So I don't understand how sea level rises in one place and not everywhere. So are we saying sea levels have gone up 11 inches, or what does it mean when you say it's the Boston Harbor gauge?
So not all sea level rise is okay.
Everybody at home can hear you.
Sure, great. Is equal across the globe for a variety of reasons that are somewhat complex to get into, but I will summarize very quickly. So sea level rise is caused by an influx of water from glacial melting, just making more volume. Thermal expansion of the water because we have rising warming ocean temperatures, so the water takes up more space. And then two other minor impacts which affect different places where you see sea level rise at different levels. So in Boston, for example, we are still, it's subsidence from the last glaciation and then gravitational pull. So subsidence, we are seeing rebound on the landward side of Boston, which is making the coastal part go down. So we're seeing more sea level rise. I could talk to you in more detail afterwards if you like.
So, well, so the real question is
Yes.
Mount Washington now 6,287 feet high, or is it still 6,288 feet high is the real question I have. But when you say the land is going down, I understand where the land, I'm trying to figure out, is the land going down and the water's the same?
The land
or
is-
the water going up?
It's both. The land is going down and the water is going up because of thermal expansion, because of glacial melting, and then gravitational pull.
Has our definition of sea level changed? For purposes, like, I mean, it was facetious, but not really. We have everything's measured above sea level, and I'm asking, is sea level itself as a base? Now, is it changed? I just didn't realize it.
That's
or are we still using the original?
That's a great question. I think we're going through the original mean high water mark is typically where those standards are taken.
Yeah, and that's going up.
I think that's our baseline, and the way we're measuring it is from where that goes up from the baseline. So we're not changing our baseline. But I would probably want to get back to you on that.
I'm not fighting. The
No,
problem.
no, I'm not, yeah.
A mean water level is a mean. So if
Right.
we're saying that it goes up higher on one side, that's telling me it's also dropping if the mean isn't changing.
Well, the mean probably is changing, but we're basing our calculations on the historic mean.
I think we've picked the level that we call sea level that is not necessarily sea level for purpose of measuring mountains. Is that the summary? In other words, we're not actually measuring sea level. We call something sea level that was sea level at some year in the past. We started measuring it, and so we haven't changed how high the mountains are, even though sea level is.
So at the mean high tide, if you will, that's what they call the mean high water mark.
Changing that every year. It doesn't change.
Right, so, sure. Great questions. I've never gotten that difficult a question on this, so I feel like I need to do some homework and get back to you.
The town of Medfield has a solid foundation of assets, services, people, and infrastructure that will serve to enhance its resiliency through our changing climate. The CRB workshop participants highlighted and sought to enhance with best practice resiliency efforts to ensure a vibrant future for Medfield. Assets identified by participants include resilient infrastructure, natural assets and ecosystems. I thought some of these data points were pretty interesting. They're on the boards and in the report, which is online currently. But there's 3,000 acres of conservation land comprising 33% of land area in the town. There are 1,265 acres of biomap core habitat and 1,052 acres of biomap critical natural landscape in Medfield. There is a prominent tree canopy across the town mitigating the impact of extreme heat, stormwater, air pollutants from vehicles. And these trees sequester 4,473 tons of carbon per year, worth over $760,000. And I'm sure Darcy has some backup information on how that's arrived at, but I thought that was pretty interesting. And there's 3 heat island spots in Medfield, Shaw's Plaza, the high school, middle school complex, and was the third, the state hospital? I think so. The participants in the workshop noted that these assets as strengths in the community, particularly with the partnership of the trustees and the Army Corps of Engineers, and also the partnerships that we have with Neponset and Charles River watersheds. As far as the community services go, participants noted a strong recreation program, active community involvement, farmers market, community garden, and adverse religious leadership enhance the town cohesion of for more vulnerable populations. The workshop participants stressed the importance of the Council on Aging, their strong network with seniors, and the strong partnership between emergency response and the Council on Aging. And climate change initiatives, actions were noted such as the designation as a green community, the Energy Committee and its initiative to do LED retrofits and other energy conservation measures in town buildings. The wastewater treatment plant's solar array was noted, as well as the anti-idling campaign that the First Parish Church won recognition for recently. Once participants completed their CRB risk matrices in their small groups, each group built consensus on their top 5 priority actions from their risk matrices for each of the 3 categories, which were infrastructure, society, and environment. Participants then reconvened as a large group to report on their top resiliency actions, and then these actions were documented and collated on posters. And participants then voted with stickers on their top 3.
Can I back you up again, Sarah? Because that chart I did not understand. The society, take the first line, the Charles River at Route 109 is a bridge. The society is senior citizens. How does that relate?
Yeah, the chart's a little misleading. I probably need to reformat it. So if you look at the neighborhoods that are of concern are all green, and then the society, it's by column, it's not across. So I probably need to reformat that so it's more, so then it's not, they're not related to each other except by columns.
Okay, thank you. I was just to remember seeing a whole
You're
lot
the
of
second
seniors
person to
taking
ask me
walks
about
over
that.
the bridge into Millis.
No, I know.
Wondering, missing something.
The
Okay,
grand
thanks.
exodus.
So from this exercise, workshop participants designated the following as their top priority actions, which are water conservation measures, protect Route 109 from flooding, reduce urban heat island, particularly at the high school and middle school complex, and install a generator at the center to protect vulnerable populations in the event of power outages during extreme events.
I have another question. On that chart that you were on, so that then maybe Darcy, either one of you can answer. To what extent are these votes, do these votes incorporate any form of technical input? In other words, what I saw, I only saw the tail end of the day, and so it's great. I was impressed with people that put time in to do this. But for instance, if we take something like the bridge over the Charles River at 109, deciding the bridge needs to be raised, if that was one of the things, that's a technical assessment that somebody should have made, as opposed to deciding that we need to expand the floodplain so that the flooding doesn't go high enough to flood the bridge. In this process, is this more just general citizens kind of saying what they think, as opposed to this has then been vetted in any technical sense about is the thing they think really the best technical
Yeah, it
approach?
certainly hasn't been, because
Okay.
you know that we haven't done any engineering studies
Okay,
with that.
okay.
But in the event that there are some engineering studies that take into consideration extreme flooding events, and I don't think there's been that many, but if it were to come into consideration, we'd have some backup and be eligible for additional pots of money
Yeah.
for the technical work.
So,
And
yeah, so that's
construction
kind of where my head is at. I'm trying to
Long-term.
understand whether this presentation I should think of as the things we're doing to help us get set up for additional pots of money, or whether this is a discussion about things the town really needs to think about doing specifically. I think it's the former, not the latter.
Well, it can be a little bit of both.
It's both, yeah. So I would suggest by keeping it broad that the CRB participants noted, and I would just also like to mention I did this with the town of Millis at the same time, and that was one of their top priorities. So there's an opportunity for Medfield and Millis to collaborate. But by identifying this as a real issue and an action that they want to take on, you can, or the towns can now apply for an action grant that would enable a more detailed engineering study. In some cases, these lend itself to a direct grant to do some implementation work that might be more programmatic as well. So, so it's both.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Gus, I can tell you as a participant in this exercise that it was pretty much on my part just a gut reaction of picking from amongst the different topics that we'd highlighted.
Yeah, I'm not trying to fight the message, I'm trying to actually get my own head screwed into how I should look at what this information means for us, that's all.
And in addition, I just want to add that we've vetted this with our core team, and they had a chance to review it. So, of course, the core team is, in addition, has greater knowledge of some of the needs of the community, infrastructure-wise or programmatically. And so we wanted to make sure that their needs were mentioned or got put into this as well as the hazard mitigation plan.
And just for clarification, core team, town administrator, DPW, police, fire.
That would start to
planning,
bring some of that
conservation,
technical
yeah.
perspective in. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so now Darcy's up for the rest.
Do you need us to say she did a passing job or anything, or okay?
She did a fabulous job.
I want to make sure the requirement is met, that's all.
Okay, so I apologize for some reason. This is the formatting, and this is a little weird. Okay, great.
We're working on the kinks on that.
So as I mentioned, we're doing the natural hazard mitigation plan simultaneous with MVP. Typically, natural hazard mitigation plans look at historic events, things that have happened in the past, whereas MVP looks at the future. But really what we want to do is to ensure that we can take preventive actions today to reduce our future risks, both that we know historically have occurred and what we believe to occur in the future with climate change, with both of these strategies. So the town of Medfield has a FEMA hazard mitigation planning grant. By completing this effort, this will enable the town to qualify for FEMA hazard mitigation grants to implement some of those larger infrastructure projects that might be more robust and expensive that MVP might not otherwise be able to pursue. So just a brief overview of what has happened. So we've developed a core team that guided our MVP and our HMP process. We did hazard identification and mapping. So what are some of the hazards that we're looking at? These include extreme temperatures, winter storms, wind hazards from tornadoes or hurricanes, tsunamis, though they don't apply, we still have to evaluate your risk, and earthquakes, landslides, things of that nature. We worked with a core team to update and map critical facilities. These include buildings that are municipal buildings, emergency services, daycare, senior centers. We talked about the pets last time, and we kept them in there because we thought pets are people's homes, part of their family, things of that nature, churches, places where people congregate or provide essential services for the town. Then we looked at how those risks, those hazards, really affect the vulnerability of your critical facilities and your infrastructure in your town, and do a vulnerability assessment. We looked at your mitigation measures from your previous plan. We evaluated, meaning the core team, which ones were effective, which ones we thought were not effective, which ones we wanted to translate into the next plan. And then we created new mitigation strategies to address some of those new vulnerabilities that we identified in this update. We're now at this point where we are about to approach plan approval and adoption, and then implementing and updating the plan is the final component of this. So hazard mitigation plans need to be updated every 7 years. The difference between hazard mitigation and MVP, you don't need to demonstrate progress necessarily. We do hope you will demonstrate progress on this. But with MVP, you do need to demonstrate progress to remain a designated community. So that one needs to be redone every 5 years. So these are the hazards that we looked at. We also completed a composite natural hazard. So we overlay all of those hazards to see some of the areas that are at greater risk, which is those areas in darker red, that based upon their winter, wind, geologic, and flood hazard areas. excuse me, I'm going back. We spatially analyze some of those risks with your critical facilities, and my allergies are hurting my eyes, so again, making my eyes very difficult to see. I'm sorry if you can't see that. But I believe we have, is it 9 facilities and let me just pull up my chart so I can read this accurately. My apologies. 4 facilities in an urban heat island, critical facilities. These include things like the schools, the Medfield State Hospital. We have 1 critical facility that's in a 1% annual chance flood, 4 wells, 3 bridges, and 4 dams. Of course, the latter are in water areas, so we would expect those to be in flood zones. And the 0.2% annual chance flood, or more known as the 500-year flood, 1 critical facility and 4 dams are located in there. And then the team also identified local hazard areas, such as areas they know to flood and areas that we know to have frequent brush fires. And we have 7 critical facilities located in those areas.
Darcy, what's the town facility that's in the 1% and the 0.2% flood area? Do you know?
I can't recall off the top of my head. I probably should.
Garage. It's right in the flood zone, right?
Are the wells part of those facilities?
The wells I pulled out separately. So the
Oh,
wells are in a 1% annual chance, but not in a 0.2% annual chance. So they
Oh,
are
I see, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't see the wells were on a separate line, yeah.
Just a quick question about that. I mean, how does that work? Isn't the 0.2%, isn't that a worse flood?
That's more known as a 500-year flood.
So why wouldn't that pick up everything that's also in the 1% flood?
It does, it's the same building.
Well, it says the wells and the bridges are not affected by the 0.2%,
Well-
but they are affected by the 1%. Why is that?
It depends on where they're located. So I will go back and double check, but some areas are going to flood in a 500-year flood that might not in a 100-year flood.
Oh, I get it, but
Right.
wouldn't everything that floods in a 100-year flood also flood in a 500-year flood?
Not
If it's the worst
necessarily.
flood? Ah. Okay. So it would come in from a different angle?
Right.
Came in from that place?
Water, right.
We can pull those
I will
out.
double check to make sure that's
Make a
accurate.
note.
That's a good question. We did do modeling to try and understand what the financial risk is to the vulnerability for precipitation, earthquakes, and hurricanes. And what I'll show you today, this plan will be online, so you'll have a chance to look at it. But we have about 4,000 buildings in the town of Medfield. If we were to have a 1% annual chance flood, the building damage is estimated at $6.7 million. Loss of business interruption, economic losses around $3.85 million. And then that almost doubles for the 0.2% annual chance flood at $14 million for buildings and $5 million for business interruption loss.
Those numbers are actually pretty good. I think it reflects.
They're not bad. No, I think you're all right.
Very good shape.
I would say you're okay.
That's probably 1/10 of 1% of our assessed value in town. So that's probably
And as
a
Sarah,
good place to move, Medfield.
it is a good place to move. As Sarah mentioned, all those natural assets are really critical towards building a resilience and creating more flood storage and better air quality, better water quality. So I think that is a huge asset for you. So we did look at some of the new development that's coming in through town. We worked with the core team to identify new development areas, and we also used our mass builds database. And so we have 2 new development sites that are in an urban heat island, 3 in a 1% annual chance, and 2 in a 500-year flood or 0.2% annual chance. 1 is located in an area that the core team identified as flooding.
You wouldn't know which one that one was, would you?
They're in the plan. I apologize.
Sarah, would you know? I mean,
I was
if we have one new development that's in a place that floods. I'm
Oh,
Oh, wait,
curious.
I
Sarah?
did. Let's see. Let's
Yeah.
see if I.
I'm thinking that the municipal facility is the wastewater treatment plant, and that would mean the park might be the development that's in, because that was a big issue when that was getting built, that it
That's
was
true.
very
I think
close
they
to
were thinking
the,
about future development, though.
to the high water.
New and potential development.
So actually, so this is a listening session. This is the information that Darcy's going to retrieve. We'll actually put it on the website, so we'll know what these
are, so you don't have to go actually read the plan, but we'll get it for you.
So we mapped your earthquake hazards. We are in a low area of earthquakes. Actually, earthquakes are very frequent in Massachusetts. They just don't typically go over like a 2 or 3 on the Richter scale. So we actually have frequent earthquakes, but your risk to those is pretty low for something over, say, a 4, which might have severe damage. For hurricanes, we're looking at 120 mile per hour winds for a hurricane, and that's for the whole town. And then snow, we're looking at 36 to 48 inches annually. So the core team, and we combined the MVP actions and core team identified actions, as I mentioned. We looked at actions from the last plan that might want to be rolled over into this plan that still remain a high priority. We looked at new actions, and then we included MVP actions. So what I did do today is, there's quite a number of them, so this is a subset for some of this flood mitigation. We also looked at kind of timing around this, the estimated cost, who would be the lead on that, and some potential funding sources too. So the intent here is that the core team would continue to check in and start to think about, and work with Sarah to start to think about ways that they can start to build more resilience by taking on some of these actions and utilizing leveraging some of the grant funding available for that. So what we did do today is put the MVP priority actions and the natural hazard mitigation plan actions on the wall over here, and have sticky dots, and you can vote. And I have also pens, and you can write in any other actions that you think might be important for the town that we might have missed. So I will stay here and wait for folks if they want to take a look today. So just what's next? We will be submitting the MVP report to EEA for your MVP designation. That's due at the end of the week. The draft natural hazard mitigation plan will be on the town website probably tomorrow. I will update it and put it on the town, give it to Sarah tomorrow. That will be for public review until June 11th, and you can send your comments to me. My email address is at the end. Once that comment period is over, Sarah and I will review public comments and incorporate them into the plan, and then we send it to MEMA for their approval, and then to FEMA for their approval. We'll do any revisions if they're required. Typically, that's been a very smooth process for us. And then if there are no corrections, FEMA issues a conditional approval. Sarah will bring the plan back to the Board of Selectmen to adopt, and then FEMA will issue the final plan approval.
At the end of the year.
And then again, the town will be eligible to apply for FEMA mitigation grants and MVP action grants for 5 years.
What sort of level are those grants?
Right now, the MVP action grant goes until up to $200,000, and they will do construction projects. They request that you phase them, so indicating there's an opportunity to reapply to continue those phased projects. The grant, as it stands today, does prioritize nature-based solutions, so that's another component. Excuse me.
So I'm doing a bigger than a bread box, smaller than a barn kind of analysis here. On the prior chart, I just did a quick summary, and it seemed like the projects that were listed ranged somewhere from $500,000 to $1 million in total value, plus or minus, whatever. The items that you had there on the next steps, there were 4 that caught my attention. 4 that caught my attention. FEMA issues conditional approval, town adopts the plan by a BOS vote. FEMA issues final plan approval, and then plan is in effect for 5 years. In this process, what are we obligating ourselves to do anything in particular? I know we have the plan, we've laid it out, and it sounds like we have to make progress in order to remain eligible for grants. But in going through this process and getting to the approved final plan, are we committing the town to anything?
So you're not committed to do anything.
Okay.
We do hope you will do
No,
a
I
lot.
understand, yeah.
Obviously, we understand not only are financial resources limited, but staff capacity to enable these grants to be put forth is limited. So this is where it diverges. The natural hazard mitigation plan is valid for 7 years. You do not have to make progress on that. Thank you so much. You can just, in 7 years, go back and redo your plan. There's no requirement to do any actions. For MVP, That's a 5-year plan. The state does require you to make some progress on that MVP report. In order to remain a designated MVP community, why is that important? It allows you to apply for MVP action grants, but it also becomes a way to boost points in other grant programs, such as a land grant if you're looking to acquire land for conservation, and other grants. That's, from what I understand, the secretary, who's now the commissioner, was working to make that a priority for grant programs across many state grants for municipalities. So that's the one, and those projects tend to be a little bit less expensive, but where you're not necessarily replacing culverts. The action grants, the MVP looks at doing some more feasibility studies and things of that nature. So
if I understand the information you provided, the hazard mitigation plan table, these projects are on the hazard mitigation plan. You don't have to do them, but hopefully we would do some of them. We'd apply for grants. We'd worked on some of these. The vulnerability preparedness list, in the information that's in this presentation, that would be the chart that has the red dots showing how people voted that would then presumably have to be refined, or where does that chart go?
That's the one that I'll need to track
Yep.
implementation of. I think it's a little bit easier because the projects can be smaller. So for example, if the solar panels at the Kingsbury Club moves forward, that's something that could work there because it's technically town-owned land. Other municipal buildings, those are smaller bits that we can bite off along the way.
So again, I'm just trying to understand if we're committing what it is we're committing to. I understand that we're trying to do some, independent of whether any of this has been done, there's some things that are probably gonna happen in the town that are in a good direction that would fall into this category that may or may not be on this list. My comment earlier about the list, though, is that this is kind of it's a casually created list from some people who are willing to commit a day to putting it together without the technical vetting that would say, no, these are the things we have to do. And I'm just trying to understand in the process, do we carry this list forward to tighten it up and get it to that technically validated list, or is it more just what you're saying?
Yeah, I think it depends.
That's a direction, and we look for things.
No, it depends on, what the priorities are. So the Department of Public Works has a number of responsibilities in these charts, and whatever aligns with their priorities and the town's priorities, this helps give.
All right, yep. So the issue, this isn't you, Darcy, this is probably Sarah. So the issue the sensitivity I have is that this process not put the DPW on a path of this is a list and I have to check things off without that prioritization process saying, no, these really are important things to do. That would be my concern, that we not kind of get an administrative locomotive going without staying focused on the prioritization.
Yeah, I don't think that would happen.
Okay.
In addition, all of the action items identified at that workshop are part of the report. So you could apply for a grant for any one of those action items in there. This is a way to help the town say, well, these are what you said. It's a crowdsourcing type community-based planning project.
Yep.
And what your concern has been replicated about this in other towns. And I will say some towns have chosen to take a look at this and say, great, now I qualify for funding. Now I really want to hire MAPC to do a really in-depth vulnerability assessment to really understand the more technical components of our vulnerabilities and risks.
Okay.
Yeah. So to be completely honest, a lot of the action items from the 2011 plan were not implemented. So just to speak to Darcy's earlier point about some of these big ticket items, they might not happen, but they're noted.
My last question, in this process, did the town get any credit for the Overlook project that added 1 million gallons of floodplain storage?
Well, you are not the first person to say that today.
Okay. Okay. 3.5 to 5 million, okay. Well, yeah, I forgot the 11-inch increase in the sea level.
So
I'm just curious whether we got any credit for that, or?
I don't know if it was
how it was credited, or if it
Well,
was.
we should credit. That's
Yeah.
amazing. So congratulations. Send me an email and I'll make sure it gets in the report.
Okay, great. thanks.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And just, oops, just want to make sure this is, please, oh yeah, there we go.
No.
You can submit your comments to me at my email address, which was the last slide, and I did too quickly, by June 11th. So happy to have your comments. Thank
Could I
you.
just ask a very specific question? By the way, this is the inaugural opening of our new widescreen
Yes.
presentation, so thank you, that was great. But there was a culvert on Prairie Street, and I'm just wondering, is there really a culvert on Prairie Street that I don't know about, or is it the one on Upham Road that we should be looking at?
Oh, gosh. It's Prairie Upham, yeah. That there was something that was identified in the 2011 plan.
Yeah, as a
That still
Prairie.
remained a priority. Yeah.
I would think it would
Is
be
that-
the Upham Road one, but that just struck me, because I don't know of one on Prairie Street off the top of my head.
Yeah, I did walk through all of those items with Maurice last week. So one by line by line by line by line.
All right.
So
Yeah, he probably knows then.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
great. Thank you very much.
All right. 10 minutes late for a 7:30 hearing, so I think we may go there next. Had a public hearing. Zealous Beer Company requests annual pouring permit from the town, location 1 Green Street. Welcome.
Hello.
Um,
Want me to stand over there?
I guess you stand over there, and we'll start with if there's anything you'd like to say, and then we'll open it up to any questions or comments from the audience.
Yes, we're just applying for a pouring permit on the basis of our farmer brewer license, which we hold in Massachusetts, for 1 Green Street in Medfield. That's kind of it, really.
And Mark, the only thing I wrote down on this is, I assume from the legal standpoint, they're in good shape to do this.
Well, I think you want to hear about their experience, what they're actually proposing to do, and specifics of their operation.
And I want to hear what part of the South you're from.
The South. I'm from Texas. No, I'm originally from the UK. I've lived here for 16 years.
Okay.
I hold a US passport. I can't hold all the licenses which I hold because we hold a federal. So we now the space at 1 Green Street. We now have a federal Tax and Trade Bureau TTB license and a state license. You can only hold them as a US citizen.
So a pouring license, right now, they can have sampling as part of the farmer's brewing. The pouring license, which is a local license, and it's fairly non-specific as far as the ABCC is concerned in these cases, is the ability to sell for on-premises consumption. So, any questions you have about their experience, what their plan is going forward, those types of things are all relevant.
Yes, so my starting question of you, because we'd had this preliminary discussion when the road race question came up, was because it's not a license that until you showed up, I wasn't even familiar with it. I just wanted to make sure there were no other legal hoops other than this hearing that they have to go through. I assumed the answer was no, but.
The answer, yeah, this license is,
Okay.
this is more focused than the other was.
Okay. Maybe then, we could just ask you to briefly describe what it is you envision doing, so that all of us understand how you propose to operate, and.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm a bit tall for this thing. I think. So yes, we have the space is about 1,800 square feet. About 1,000 of it is a serving area, tap room, which has seating and a bar in it, and then about 800 of it, well, a bit less than that, maybe 600 is a brewing facility, a small one, and then we have two bathrooms, and an office, and the plan is we already contract brew at Ipswich Ale, and we've also done some at down the road. We'll probably use other brewing facilities. So largely we've been a wholesale business from now, selling to accounts all over the place. We do a lot of events too, like we have experience doing events. When I say a lot, I would say we probably do 50 plus a year. So we've served to lots of people. But we've never had a retail space. We've been based in Medfield since we started, but we've been totally incognito. No one knows where we are. And we're seeking to change that. So the bar, we'd only sell beer. So we'd pour pints and do paddles of tasters, probably 4 times 4 ounces. We may do some cider. There's a little known law where you can brew cider, so you can get the apple. Anyway, there's a possibility we might do cider. And then we'd also do soft drinks, water, snacks. And we would also offer, or you could get takeaway from local restaurants. We've spoken to pretty much all the restaurants in town. They're all highly supportive. Well, I don't want to speak for any of them, but they're all highly supportive of the idea, because it'd be additional business for them, and the idea is we can bring some more people to the town. The other part of our concept is we're about active lifestyle. So, we have a specialized brewing process which allows us, we have a unique brewing process, and a lot of the events we do are running races, cycling races, and the idea would be that we would be a base for the teams in town. We've already spoken to them, so there's a cycling club which has about 150 members in it, and there's a running club, Soul of Medfield, and both are interested at being involved with the space we have. Hence, we wanted to have a race in town as well, and hopefully one day we will get one. At least not on probably not on Route 27.
We have open space.
Any questions?
George, who's going to manage this tap room?
My wife is the applicant. My wife's right there. We also have a guy called Joe Henry McDonald, who is from Medfield, and he will be the bar manager. We also have other people but the primarily would be those two who manage the location. They are all, just so you know, they're all tips. And anyone who works there will be tip certified. Sometimes in-person tip certification. A lot of towns in Massachusetts require in-person tip certification now.
What does that mean, in-person tip certification?
There's tips.
Training on alcohol.
It's a level of training, the tips, but that's different.
Tips is a program.
I know tips, but I don't know what in-person is.
Yeah. There's you can get tip certified online. So you can just go online.
Oh,
and you
so
can
this
get
is
on
you show
premise
up.
or off premise. This is one where you actually physically have to attend.
Yeah, okay, got it.
Yes, learn the rules that exist. Yes.
So with this pouring license, it goes hand in hand with your brewer's license, so you only be able to serve product that you manufacture yourself on the premises. So at any given time, what's the range that you expect to have available?
Well, we're allowed to serve anything which is brewed under our own entity. So anything which is brewed in contract facilities is allowed to be sold there too. And currently we have 6 beers which are brewed in these contract breweries. We plan to brew. We haven't decided exactly how much we're going to brew on premise. We have a small facility, but we want to use it as sort of test batches. Quite honestly, we want to become kind of the home of wellness beer. So there's a big trend in the beer industry towards wellness beer, low-calorie beers, low-alcohol beers. Like all our beers are currently 5% and below. We may break those rules a little bit in the tap room just because we want to. Well, anyway, 5% is quite low for beer, quite frankly, especially craft beer. But so yes, we're only legally allowed to sell things which are brewed under our own entity. Hence, contract brewing, anything we brew on premise.
Do you have a kitchen? Is there food as well, or is it just strictly the beer?
We were going to have
Just grab the microphone next to you there.
Yep.
We were going to have things like packaged chips and pre-made salsa, that kind of thing, but we're not preparing anything. And so, we really wanted to focus. There's so many good restaurants around, and we're definitely not looking to compete with that. We do what we do, and that's why we had talked to them about the idea of bringing in food. Okay. So, and they all seem enthusiastic, especially, Takara, there's pizza places. There's so many restaurants around that A lot of other tap rooms that we've been to, they do keep just a little case of menus, and you can order, and they either deliver, or if it's very busy, we can have someone run and pick up the food nearby for people as well.
This may not be a fair question, but as I'm listening to you talk, what I'm doing in my head is I'm saying, okay, I can think of Overlook Farm has kind of a tasting room on a farm, you know, that's local brew, and I get that. Trillium has local brew with a pretty expensive restaurant, and so I'm trying to just figure out where you are on the scale. So it's not that you're gonna be Overlook Farm, but it feels to me like that's the kind of a feeling it's gonna be to go in there as a place where there's some locally brewed beer, not overly formal.
No, it kind of, we want to kind of be two things, actually. We want to be sort of a community location, so that people from the local community will hang out there. And we also want to become a destination for any, you know, active lifestyle. I mean, that's a big part of our business model. So yeah, Trillium is larger than we are.
Yeah.
Currently.
Is this the Ankara space?
Yes, it used to be the Peruvian restaurant.
And so how many people would you be able to seat?
Well, we have, according to the planning board, which is based on parking, it's 42 seats. We haven't finished construction on it yet, but I think the building commissioner has some say on the final actual level of occupancy, which is dictated to by bathrooms and egresses. So we have 2 ADA compliant bathrooms, and we have 2 egresses. And the size of the location.
And what hours do you plan to be open?
We're not totally sure at the moment. We already have planning board permission, and broadly we're going to request the same hours which we have the planning or zoning board. I get a little confused about the difference. Yeah. So we have permission from them, which we've had for a while, and we were going to ask for those hours, but whether we're actually open for those hours.
What were the hours?
Okay.
You can close earlier than the hours you're
Yeah.
given, but you can't be open later than
Right.
the hours. So I
Yeah.
would suggest you go with the maximum hours, whatever the ZBA has indicated.
Yes.
You know what they are, Sarah?
Not off the top of my head, but they were given to us by the applicant.
They are Monday to Wednesday, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m., Thursday to Saturday 11 a.m. to 11 p.m., and Sunday 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. We also can sell off-premise, and I believe that the starting time for that is 9 a.m. Not sure about what it is on Sundays, though.
So what does that mean? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, where would you sell off
You
premise?
need a one-day license for that.
No, we have, because our farmer brewer license allows us to sell.
So this would be an event.
Well, you can sell bulk under that at a agricultural event. You can be off premises and serve for consumption with a one-day license, which you have to pull each time you have an event.
We're applying for a pouring permit. So
And
we can
that pouring permit that you're getting tonight, if you get it, is confined to those premises.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
So your farmer's brewing allows you to go out to like a farmer's market, anything that's approved by the State Department of Agricultural Resources, and sell in bulk, but not for consumption. You can sample, but you can't have for consumption. If you want to go somewhere else in town and have to an event and have consumption, then you would need to get a one-day license.
Yes, what I meant by off-premise was that someone could buy the goods, they can buy a 4-pack and take it off-premise.
Right, yeah,
Yes, we will not,
Okay,
we will
I
not,
thought
we
you
will not,
meant
we will.
on Sunday morning, you were gonna pull your picnic table out in front of the building and start at 9 and not open until noon.
Buy cans of beer in addition to drinking it there.
Yeah, sure.
No, we will apply, we have applied for one-day license. We actually have one for June the 15th or 16th for
Rocky
yes.
Woods.
Rocky Woods, yes.
Right, okay. Question, any further?
Further from me.
Pete, any further from you?
I think I'm okay. I'm curious as to where you were hidden in Medfield before, but that's not important, I guess.
heavy industrial.
We weren't open to the public before, so it was purely our offices and storage and where we operated out of. We've actually been renting from the Seventh Wave from David Sturmish,
Well, adjacent to it, the building owner.
within his building, so.
It's part of the craft brewing community that we're trying to create an industry for here. That's diversified.
Yeah. There's a lot of space at the,
And we
at
will
the
keep
Seventh
a
Wave.
warehouse space there. We have a warehouseman license now for that space, so we will continue to use that as storage because the Green Street space is pretty small. So even for
Yeah, we
our
need a
outside
larger
events, we
warehouse,
have
yeah.
tables and tents and things like that that will be stored in there.
So David at Seventh Wave showed me all the array that he has for brewing.
Much
and-
larger than
But he told me that he doesn't use most of them.
Yes. Ours is much, much smaller, but.
So we just have a recommendation. This is an annual permit that they'll renew in December of each year. So where we're halfway through the year, Evelyn had recommended that we charge $375 for the permit and prorate it for the 6 months. If that's okay to you.
Are there any other public questions or comments? We're ready to move. Is that permits, any objections to the permit price prorated?
Nope.
I would move that we issue an annual pouring permit to Zeus Beer Company.
Zealous.
Say it again?
Zealous.
Zenus?
I thought it was zealous.
Zealous, Z-E-L-U-S, Z-E-L-U, Zealous.
You can call it what you like.
Beer
It's
Company.
I've tried it, and I've drunk it a little more aggressively because it was zealous.
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye,
With the times as contained in the ZBA permit?
Yes.
so moved.
Oh, well, is that subject to the planning board's confirmation yet?
No, it's a ZBA.
CBA, okay, so that's set.
I believe so, yes.
Okay,
Well, thank you and good luck.
thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you
you.
for coming to town. Good luck with it.
Being public.
So when is the pouring permit start?
It gets
Tonight.
issued.
Oh,
You got
Yeah.
it?
We're prorating the fee.
What time is our meeting ending?
Right. We'll be by around 8:30.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot.
The healthy beer, that's what I remember, the electrolytes. Good luck.
Take care, thanks for coming. All right, back to the Development Committee, you guys.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to suggest that we go to the garden club next. Because that might be a shorter discussion, and they got here first, they've been sitting here for a long
Okay.
time. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, we try
They
to
may
make
not
this.
be honest, but they may not be here.
We're planning a meeting.
We're gonna go there for a meeting.
I'm Donna McClellan. I'm 3-time past president of the Garden Club and a serial board member of the Garden Club. I'm at 71 Blacksmith Drive in Medfield. You have the request that Nancy Teller proposed to give us the grant from the funds from the meal tax. I think that the request is pretty self-explanatory. We feel that we are the logical vehicle in Medfield to facilitate the use of these funds and to get you to your goal of civic beautification. The club, moreover, is excited about the idea that you're showing support for us and collaborating with us and maybe showing us some appreciation for the 80-plus years that we've been doing this on our own. So I don't know what more you might want to ask, but we have a couple of presidents and a vice president here, so if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Mr. Sorrell wants to say something.
It can be done from a process standpoint, but again, the same issue that arose with the Historic Society and the Peak House raises its head, which is named with the anti-aid amendment. So the funding has to go in a way that is compliant with law. So we could buy, say, plant material for them to install, that type of thing.
We shouldn't give the money directly to them here.
We can't do that.
No, I think we'll do it in the way we've done in the past. Yeah.
So last year when we approved this, technically you didn't get the money from us, or 2 years ago?
2 years ago.
2 years
Is that
ago.
long?
2 years ago.
Right.
That's so fast. when we did that, we actually paid for reimbursement.
We submitted invoices for reimbursement, and I think we didn't even use it all.
Our treasurer is here. Mary?
Okay. So that,
Yes.
with that mechanical provision in place, then we're good, we're okay.
Yep.
So, am I remembering correctly that you're asking for $2,500?
2,500.
And how much money do we have left in our kitty?
Around 18,000.
Okay.
And the warrant committee wouldn't give us any more because we had.
Should we,
As of July 1st, we'll have 19,000.
should we ask for more?
No.
I don't have any questions. When this came up before, you all have done a lot for the town, and the one thing I see a little, aside from the legal restrictions, the one thing that we're talking about here is a committee that's doing something for the town, with the town stuff. It's not even repairing a privately owned building or anything like that. We're aware that there was some dissent, and some dissent from, speaking personally, some people who, just to the extent that I know them, I appreciate overall their intellect, I appreciate them as people here in town who care. However, your board, as far as I can tell, is unanimous in wanting to do this. Your president wants to do this, the committee, the garden club itself wants to do this. So
We actually took this back to the membership at the May meeting, and the entire membership voted on it. And of the entire membership, there was only one person who abstained.
Yep. So my view is that I'm in favor of what you're requesting. I wish you the best of luck at getting your entire membership. We're happy about everything you do. Okay. You ready? Motion?
So, on a personal note, I would just say that I'm very appreciative of what the garden club does for the town and all the sites that you guys maintain. It really is a nice thing for the town, so thank you for that. On another personal note, the aloe plant that you sold me at your annual sale has died because I didn't water it, and so.
Cactus, stock cactus.
But despite the aloe plant's demise, through my neglect, I planted everything else in one place, and then I planted the aloe plant somewhere else and forgot about it.
You guys do salt flowers too?
In our view, you killed an aloe plant.
It's impossible to do that.
Oh, well, maybe it's still alive then. It looked pretty bad. I will move that we request the garden club request for the $2,500 for civic beautification efforts.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Nobody? Passes?
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Right, now the development committee. Well, while Todd's going up, I guess, as the selectman's representative to this committee, over the last 6+ months, I just appreciate the effort and the professional expertise that they brought to the table on this. My own personal perspective is that we seem to be on a cleaner, clearer track toward moving ahead than I was anticipating when the committee was first formed, so I appreciate the chance to work with you guys. I just keep shut up and listening. I learn a lot.
Okay, well, thank you. Before I get started, I wanted to introduce two other members of the committee that are here tonight, Mr. Ken Richard and Mr. Johnny Martinez. Adam Emiden was not able to join us tonight. Just a bit of a review. The selectmen formed the development committee back in August with the stated purpose of making recommendations to the selectmen on what, if anything, should be presented to special town meeting regarding the future of the state hospital site. Since then, we've met regularly. We've had 10 meetings over the last 9 months. Actually, this will be the 11th. We posted this as a meeting to make sure we complied with open meeting laws. And we also met individually and with our town planner with the 5 developer respondents to the RFI that we published in October, so I guess that would put us at 16 meetings since the committee was formed. And during those meetings, we've received and reviewed responses. We gave you an update in December. We went back out and then, scheduled those developer interviews in the first quarter of this year. And subsequently, in our committee meetings, we reviewed those results and discussed and debated them. And at this point, we're ready to deliver our recommendations to the selectmen, of which there are 4. And what I'd like to do is go through them completely, because some are interrelated, and then answer any questions you may have at that point. So our first recommendation is to formally support the vision of the master plan and the preferred scenario by presenting the proposed zoning at a special town meeting. Having engaged the developer community and found substantial support and interest, the committee endorses the vision, specifically a mix of uses including up to 334 units of new housing, an arts center, utilizing the Lee Chapel and infirmary buildings, and substantial open space for public use and benefit. We don't have any specific changes to propose or that we see as necessary at this particular point in time. And just to elaborate some on that recommendation, it's clear from meeting with developers that flexibility is important going forward, and certain uses may be less viable than others, and market conditions may well change over the development period. And none of this is really unusual in the development world. We don't see presenting the zoning at a special town meeting to be a point of no return, but rather a statement by the town and the committee that this is the goal and this is the focus of the development effort. We feel that the town can maintain control over the pace of development and the disposition efforts over time by controlling the disposition of the specific parcels. As a related matter, we do anticipate that developers responding to an RFP may deviate in some respects from the master plan. We feel it's very important that these changes be very clearly identified and can be evaluated prior to any specific disposition decisions being made at a subsequent town meeting. I would add to that we found in developer meetings that developers saw it as a clear risk, potential lack of support by the town or town government. It was extremely important to them that they understood, in order to spend the time and money, that this was a plan that the town believed in and was prepared to pursue, subject, of course, to negotiations and the normal things that you would have during any complicated redevelopment. That would be our first recommendation. Our second recommendation would be to complete additional due diligence prior to that special town meeting. We're very grateful that monies were appropriated at annual town meeting, and anticipate using those funds and propose to use those funds to further study utility infrastructure costs, particularly water and sewer, and payment mechanisms for water and sewer, environmental remediation costs associated with the redevelopment, versus demolition or a do-nothing alternative, and to secure some technical support services related to the zoning and potentially to an RFP. We are proposing to calendar that so we and you have the results of that prior to special town meeting relating to zoning, so that, difficult but fair questions that townspeople may have can be answered with the best information possible prior to any vote on zoning. We also had a meeting and some good conversations with Mass Development, which is the state's economic development agency. We don't yet know where those conversations are going, but they toured the site and were very enthusiastic about some role they could potentially play with the town, and we would anticipate putting some more shape on those, on their interests by the time a special town meeting were to occur. Our third recommendation would be, if and only if the zoning is approved at special town meeting, we would then proceed to an RFQ or an RFP for developers. we would be able to utilize that information from developers and updating cost analysis to the town that was initially done by the Master Planning Committee. And that would allow us essentially to narrow down the pool of qualified developers and potentially for the recommendations to be made for the selected redeveloper or redevelopers that could then be presented or present themselves at a subsequent town meeting that sought disposition authority for the actual parcels. And then finally, our fourth recommendation is the town should begin to plan or think about its single point of contact for developers. That was a theme that we heard over and over. It was very important to have somebody at the town who would be the go-to person. We suggest that the Board of Selectmen and the town think about, how that position would be filled and funded so that if this project does move forward, as we hope it will, that the town will be in a position to continue the development efforts, with the developers who are awarded the bid.
And Todd, that single point of contact would not be the town planner, but a designated person,
Well, I think
dedicated person.
what we heard from developers was it's important to have a dedicated person. I think most people would feel like that's a full-time
Mhm. Okay.
position for some period of time and not something that could be done, kind of on the side by a town employee who had other responsibilities. So those are our recommendations. I apologize for not having a color PowerPoint or any good beer talk to share with you. It's a little dry, I
You
realize.
never need to apologize. You never need to apologize for not having a PowerPoint.
We'll start here with any questions from the selectmen, but also open it up to the floor if anyone has.
So, first question. I mean, in the course of thank you to the committee for doing this work and the time you put in and the work you did. I mean, I think this does vindicate, I think, my feelings about this process a little bit, in the sense that it's fairly clear that there was not a due diligence failure on the part of the Medfield State Hospital Master Planning Committee that needed to be filled. And it's good to have it validated, and we appreciate the effort that you put in, but I think we're kind of where we were a year ago, in the sense that there's nothing that needs to change, and there's no gaps that are identified, and there's no work that the Master Planning Committee didn't do that needed to be done.
I would say to that point, Mike, what we did.
Well, you need a microphone if you want to say
Right over
it.
here.
And this is not to say you haven't done anything, but it's more of an endorsement of the Master Planning Committee's efforts in the sense that they actually had incorporated a lot of the things that they were accused of not incorporating, such that nothing needs to be changed with the proposal.
No, I would suggest that the reception of the plan itself was considered to be complete, and what developers were asking us to give consideration to were some of the larger questions and how we would go about addressing some of the larger questions, such that the time and effort that any developer might invest in taking a run at a project, some of the bigger unknowns before they spend time and money might be in a position where the answers are better known.
In the course of this, did you guys rerun the financial model that the Master Planning Committee used to reflect the fact that the developers reported really no interest in commercial or non-residential development?
No, we did
So you've not rerun the financial model to see what it looks like to the town with zero?
No, but I think that is in part because we had identified some other areas where we felt we needed better costs. And really, without having kind of a complete update of all of your inputs, it didn't seem like it would necessarily be fruitful. So one example would be water and sewer. We had at least one developer telling us they thought the number in the plan was 3 times too high. We had others telling us they thought it was about right. That's separate from the question of who pays for it.
Mhm.
So one of our conclusions was we really need to get a better handle on this, and it's a big swing.
Mm-hmm. And is that part of the work that you anticipate being done before the special town
Yes,
meeting in the
absolutely.
fall? And
Can I confirm that? Because there's one thing that I picked up from our discussions that where Pat had put together building by building, well, actually Kathy McCabe had put a building-by-building economic model together to get to the cost estimate, which was perfectly fine. The developers you're talking to don't actually look at projects like Lego blocks, but in fact, there's a different perspective that they're taking, if I followed right. The economics for a developer may not be just the pure building-by-building economics that the cost model has, but in fact, a more broad view of tax credits and how the various financial parameters of a project work. So I don't even know that it's worth a whole lot of effort for you to update the building-by-building cost estimate. It might be far better to explore the business models that developers would find attractive for the project as a whole to make sense. Is that fair?
Well, I think you're probably gonna get both.
Okay.
I mean, there was, as I understand the financial model, there was a building-by-building profit and loss as the developer. There was also an overall financial impact on the town, which I have.
Yeah, but I'm talking something different than that. I'm saying that if and I've, not because I know any of it, it's because I'm listening to conversations, so I may have it wrong. A developer on a scale of a project at this scale is considering the financial
Right, but
the financial dimensions of a project,
view,
not on a building-by-building thing.
I agree with you,
Okay.
and I think we've already spent way too much time trying to figure out how some hypothetical developer is gonna finance this plan. I'm talking about the financial model as it relates to the impact on the town's finances, which is a component of the financial model and which was not a building-by-building analysis. It was the charts that Kathy and others put up, with the bar charts going out to the future where there's, big loss to the town for the next 15 years and then big gains to the town afterwards. It's that part of the financial model, and the assumption the committee made of 30% non-residential was a component of getting it to be tax revenue positive to the town. And so one of the feedbacks that we got from the RFI was a limited interest in non-residential development. And so if we were going to present a financial, because again, I don't think it should be the developer's job is to figure out how to pay for it. Whether they're gonna make money, what it's gonna cost, it's their job. I agree with you on the building by building, we can put that away. I mean, that was the purpose of a sanity check on, is this at least close to the ballpark? The answer was 50-50, maybe a developer could get there. I'm talking about if we're gonna present financial numbers to the town of what the impact of this proposed preferred scenario, if that's what we're going to endorse, is to the town long-term versus the competing costs of ownership of the building, mitigation of the buildings, demolition of the buildings. And that has to be updated before town meeting to reflect the fact that those numbers to impact the town are going to be worse than were presented before, because we can't realistically say there's going to be a 30% non-residential component, which helps in the trade-off between tax revenue. That's all I'm talking about, is that we have to update that to reflect the piece of information we learned in the RFI process, which is also not surprising, which is that the commercial piece of the preferred scenario is the least attractive to developers. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the building by building, trying to predict the profit and loss to developers. That's the job of the developer to figure out.
Well, again, I could be wrong.
I think you are.
But I think, I have not heard anything. The issue here, when you go down that path, is an implication that says that 334 units isn't enough because we assumed all this other stuff was commercial, so it's gonna be a much larger number of units. That's what I went into this thinking this committee was gonna come out with in the discussions with developers, and I believe this committee's discussions with developers is, no, we think there's a worthwhile project here, and we understand how many, whether it's 334 or a number or not, we think that we can make sense out of this. So the one thing that I push back on that on is the idea that because that commercial may or may not be there, and I have a different set of issues around what's viable there, it doesn't to me, the way we've been talking about, is that automatically translates into 600 units of housing, and I don't think that's an implication that the committee found.
We don't know, but I think that when you're proposing to have the restrictive layout and endorse the restrictive layout in the master plan, the only kind of flexibility that they're talking about is more units and something different within it.
And we do need to know at the time of the special
Well,
town meeting what the
here's my point of view. Like,
effects are gonna be long-term.
To me, I am not opposed necessarily to proposing something like this to the town meeting, letting the town meeting decide if we give them all the facts. And if a developer can figure out how to do this scenario unsubsidized by the taxpayers of Medfield, that's a benefit to the town. But we have to provide accurate information to the special town meeting as to what the implications are of that proposal if we're going to do it. And all I'm saying is it sounds like there's a lot more work to be done because we have not gathered much more actual information in this process to present those facts to the special town meeting, of which is the model of what the costs are going to be to the town. That's all I'm saying. And again, I don't object to putting something forward to the special town meeting. If they say no, then we're back to the drawing board. I mean,
I guess we're just looking at it differently, because you're still trying to drive toward a building by building.
No, I've said nothing at all about a building by building approach.
I think what you're saying is
But the preferred scenario, the core principle of the master plan is preservation of the buildings and preservation of the layout. That is the number one objective and core principle of the master plan. And if that's what we're going to be going with to the special town meeting, that's fine. But we have to understand what the implications are of that.
So what's the basis? How are you proposing to get to those implications?
I think you have to project whatever we think is the preferred scenario, likely scenario, and a range. And so if it's 334 units of residential, this is the impact on the town. If it goes to a higher end, this is the impact on the town. Now, we could just say, look, it's not going to be any more than 334.
Our
RFP out, developers have to say you will build not one more unit than 334, and you got to sign on the dotted line for that, and we'll see what we get. All of that is up in the air. The real information we're going to get in this process is going to be in response to an RFP. That's where we're going to really get information in this process, when the developer has to say, here's how much money I'm putting into this, here's how much of a subsidy I want from some governmental entity to do this, here's all the other things I need to do. That's when we're going to get real information, when someone's going to really put a proposal on the table. And that's what we need to get.
I think we're in agreement on that.
Because we were not brought on to rewrite the master plan. We're not endorsing anything above and beyond what the limits are of the zoning in the plan.
Right.
That would be a completely separate avenue that we're not anywhere near. I think for special town meeting, we're looking to see, sure, we'll run sensitivities on commercial real estate tax impact to the town, which is, I think, what you're talking about, the revenue to the town. But the larger thing is there something that's going to blow up this whole plan because there's more in-depth analysis in the environmental and the utility that could far outweigh any lack of commercial real estate taxes. And so that's where we're trying to get to in adjusting the model. And then obviously as we go forward, we'd continue to adjust the model before we got to any kind of a disposition at the RFP.
So the place where you and I think, are differing, and maybe I'm reacting to something that's not as much, maybe not pushing for what you are. This committee vetted the master plan as it's defined, and to my surprise, quite frankly, the developers came back and said, no, that looks okay. So from a process standpoint, the special town meeting in the fall is to get the zoning passed, given the master plan that people have been introduced to, get the zoning passed that would enable that. If I get off the trails here, you guys straighten me out here. But that's the purpose of that special town meeting, is to get that zoning in place. Once that zoning is in place, the next step that the committee is recommending is that an RFQ, which is a request for qualification, not quote, RFP be issued to some number of developers. And those developers are going to say, okay, the town passed the zoning, here's the master plan. They then come in with their preliminary proposals. Coming out of that, one possibility is that they all come in with something that says, nope, 600 units, or we're not interested, in which case we have another decision to make. But more like, at this point, at least, we have cautious optimism to think that there will be some number of those developers that will come in and say, yeah, this is what you want, here's how we would go about doing it, here's our proposal, that we'd then down select to that to issue an RFP with that specification. So that's not
another point I might make, one of the things we learned in developer interviews is that they would typically want zoning to be presented to town meeting at the same time that they would be selected as the developer. They would come to the town meeting. We've heard a lot of stories about this, including Fort Devens, 3 town meetings all on the same night. But you know, at the end of those conversations, there was basically the view from developers was this is a very complex, large project that is going to require a lot of upfront capital from the developer as well as potentially from others. And without knowing that the town, there's support in the town for a 2/3 vote to change the zoning and activate this plan that was 4 years in the making, we don't really know that this thing is ever going to happen, and we're going to spend our time on other projects. So great project, we love it, we do stuff like this, you have all the experience and credentials that are needed, but without some indication, and we're suggesting that zoning rather than one town meeting trying to deal with zoning and picking a developer, it's hard to get beyond kind of a desk analysis of what all these costs might be.
The town still has control of the disposition.
No, I'm with you on that 100%. I mean, my own view is that, and you're the experts on this, so I'm looking at you to say that this is a viable plan. I mean, one, I don't think there's enough upside in this plan to be worth a subsidy for the town. And so, if the developers are all thinking we'll get the endorsement and there's gonna be a taxpayer subsidy for this project, I don't see how in good conscience you could advocate the taxpayers of Medfield voting a significant taxpayer subsidy to this particular project. There just is not upside to the town in the plan. So the only way there is upside to the town in the master plan is if it's gonna take some of the financial burden off. And if the cost of taking that long-term financial burden off the town's balance sheet is this kind of development because there's interest in preserving the building, that's a trade-off that you have to make. I don't see subsidizing this to any significant degree from the town. And again, I'm happy to go ahead with the zoning. And if the zoning's approved, we send out an RFQ that says you have to give us a proposal that has no subsidy from the taxpayers of Medfield. Because I will not in any way support any taxpayer subsidy for this. Taxpayers of Medfield should not subsidize this particular plan.
So two points.
So again, that's why I'm fine to do the zoning. If that's the endorser of the town, that's great. But the developers love getting money from governments. They love it. That's how they, fuel their business in a lot of ways. And this government and this town should not be giving the money for this particular plan.
So 2 points. One is that some of the money for that may come from the state grant, so we have an issue to go there.
If
But the
other
more
government
important-
entities want to put money into
but
this,
that's a more important point. You're measuring as if we have no liability right now.
Nope, I'm not. I'm not at all.
When you say there's no subsidy that we would pay, if we
For
could get
this plan.
hear me out.
No.
So, no subsidy, let's just for a second here simplify this down. Therefore, no developer wants to do anything. Therefore, we have a piece of property we are not prepared to do anything with to develop. But it comes with a multi-million-dollar liability in the form of a bunch of buildings we're still gonna have to spend money on.
Yeah, but I'm
So
just
if
talking
we
about
could-
as to this plan. I'm not talking about the development. This
I'm
is not
saying if we
development.
can
This
get
is one
out from-
specific plan, not any other potential development of the project.
All right, I hear that. What you're saying is I would wanna look at alternative development
Yeah.
alternatives. Okay, yeah, no worries,
Yeah.
no
I
worries.
mean, if the idea is it's a financial decision, this is
Got it.
not the best
Got it.
financial option.
Got it.
I
No,
mean, there's
no worries.
better ways to do it.
No worries. Yeah, no worries.
It's a value option on preserving the buildings.
Well, get the microphone.
I just want. So I've said this before, I'm neither for nor against development of the house property. What I am for is an accurate representation to the town. We're going to be voting on this as to what the impact on the town is, what are the costs and what are the benefits. And I'm not all that concerned about running the financial model for what makes sense for a developer. I agree, the developer's going to run his own models to see what he determines. I just want to point out a couple things. The first pass that the consultant did showed 16 buildings at a loss for something along the neighborhood of a $13 million loss to a developer, by her calculation, to a developer. And then by playing with the percentage, that was for 250 units, which is essentially what at one stage in a public meeting that the Master Planning Committee got up and said that was their goal, to try to have 250 units. So what happened over the next several months was essentially decreasing the number of commercial percentage and increasing the number of units. And eventually we got to something like a $6 million development shortfall or whatever for a developer, and it was roughly 60 and 40% on the commercial. All right. So If utilization of the buildings is what makes it profitable for a developer, and a developer has 40% of the buildings that he can't fill with commercial, and he's not utilizing it, I'm not sure you can make a statement that says no commercial means, doesn't mean we're going to get more units. I don't know how you can get there, but I'm not going to discuss that now. I don't want to argue it now. What I do want to point out is I would like to see some of the money that gets spent by this committee, the development committee, trying to narrow down, pin down some of the actual costs and realities of what infrastructure costs and everything else. The town has work to do as well. My research into what's happened at several other hospital projects, in particular Metropolitan and Lexington, has been that the property was overassessed when they did the pro formas. So there was too much evaluation put on the property, and so that tax revenue was in fact overstated. Sale prices, market value of the property was grossly understated, and other issues where the impact of student costs were grossly understated. And I'll just throw something out. Pete and I had a discussion about this a month or so ago. We were talking about the new incremental approach for student costs, or rather than taking the school budget and dividing it by the number of students and coming up with something like $15,000 or $16,000 per student. People had argued, I think intelligibly argued, for using an incremental cost. I was not aware of any other town in the state that had used an incremental cost when figuring out the impact of a new development. I did find that also at Metropolitan and Lexington, they did in fact use an incremental cost. They had a number of 111 students, so anything over 111 students was going to have something beyond an incremental cost for them. The problem was that the incremental cost they used was, in 2011, was $7,200 per student, and that number was exceeded. Our financial model uses a number of $3,800 to $4,200 per student. So one of the things I think the town needs to do is look at what is the appropriate incremental cost for the town.
I mean, Lexington has a different.
I understand.
It's a very different.
I understand.
profile in the student population. Lexington is one of the few towns in Massachusetts that has had a substantial increase in student population.
Because they are recognized to have a good school system. People want to move there for a good school system. All of which kind of
closer to Boston than we are.
And all of which describes Medfield in terms of its desirability for
Except for how
moving.
close we are to Boston.
But
public transportation.
all I'm saying is we need to look at the financial model for what the town's profit, or the town's benefit from the development, is still a very narrow margin. It's positive, but it's positive in the future. It's not positive in the near term. It's based on assessment values, and it's based on town infrastructure costs, and it's based on student numbers. Not the quantity. I'm talking about the unit price of a student. The town needs to get those numbers defined, at least, I think, or confirmed, before you go to the zoning meeting. People at the zoning meeting are going to expect to get some kind of an impact. What's this going to cost the town? What are the benefits of the town and everything else? And unless you verify those numbers, what are you going to say?
Well, I mean, you can provide a range. I mean, the reality is, in doing it in this two-step process, in part of the problem of the two-step process, and I think it's the right way to go. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with that. Is that you're always going to be dealing in a hypothetical. You're going to be dealing with a hypothetical on the upfront cost. You're going to deal with a hypothetical on the capital. You do the hypothetical on the number of units. And so I think the message is, here's a range of possibilities if we approve this zoning. Nothing happens just on the approval of zoning. And so if the answer comes back and the developers say, look, we have to build 400 units, and I think we've got to build in some sort of a factor of, that it's quite likely that as you get halfway through the process and there's a hole in the ground or whatever, they'll come back and say, gee, we need 30 or 40 more. I mean, but I think we have to be careful of presenting sort of faux precision here. I mean, the zoning decision is a general directional decision. We want to prioritize the buildings. We want to prioritize the layout. We want to prioritize the look of what's there now and keep that look, which is what this plan prioritizes. And if that's the direction, then you have to make the second financial decision. And if the answer comes back that when you actually get RFPs and it's, it's a massive subsidy you can't afford, it's 600 units or whatever, you could always then say, look, you know what? We gave it our best shot with this prioritized. We can't do it that way. We've got to go back to the drawing board. I mean, that to me, I think is, the idea of doing it this way is to get a direction from the town on this plan that's been worked on for 4 years. Is this what we want to do? Do you want to go in this direction? If you get the yes, then you move to the next. And I think we should go into this, there should be no apocalyptic proclamations about this. We don't have to do this now. We have information from John on what it's going to take to maintain these buildings for some number of years, which we need regardless, because it sounds like you're in the direction of some sort of phasing where the buildings are going to be standing there for some period of time. This is not you have to make a decision in October or the world collapses and the hospital buildings collapse into the sea, right? There is some urgency. And so I think that's the message, Bill, is that if we're going to do it in this way, this is a directional decision on zoning, and then we'll decide the specifics. And it may well be that we get that direction and it turns out we can't make the numbers work. But we shouldn't get bogged down in theoretical, hypothetical debates about faux precise numbers. Like as good as, the financial model is really well done, but it's a model, it's a projection.
Excuse me, I'm not talking about phone numbers. I'm talking, are you going to stand up, for example, at the zoning meeting and say, this project, the preferred scenario as put forth in the master plan, makes money for the town?
No.
So what are you going to say?
Shouldn't say that about
We don't know whether it's
so
how do you expect it to get voted for if you can't present it in something of a positive light?
Bill, the master planning committee spent 3 years putting a master plan
Yeah, and it's a
together.
great plan, but not for Medfield. But that's beside the point.
But hold on. We spent 3 years doing this kind of internal study to come up with a concept, and we do have an estimate that says that it won't cost the town money. Now, the issue I think Mike and I are both sensitive to is when you get to real life and you get to developers that have to do real things, which is what this group was really intended. That's why we formed this committee, or why I wanted the committee formed, was to bring this into touch with reality around the commercial world. We're getting closer. The good news is in the early stage, the commercial world didn't sit there and gag on it.
So where are you going to get the evaluations of the property? Are you going to get those from the developer?
Well, first off, yeah, we are, because the developers are going to come in with some concept. How do you even know what they plan to build?
1 second more.
How do you even know what, we know what's in the master plan, we know what the scheme was for that. But how do you know the developers aren't going to come in and say, wait a minute, that's not, we can stick with your limits, your units, but we have a whole different concept for this.
Do you know what happened with the evaluations in Lexington? When the town complained that the evaluations that were given by the developer and by DCAM, who sold the property, were too high, the consultant who gave those evaluations said, well, your town assessors didn't say anything about the value of this property. All I'm saying is the town, it needs to do some verification. You want to pick a range of what the values of the properties are? I have no problem with that. I just don't think you can go in there blindly relying on the numbers that you got. You have no idea whether our sewer infrastructure can handle the flow from the hospital to the treatment center. I drove it, and on my odometer, it's something like 2.5 miles or whatever. What's 2.5 miles of sewer infrastructure to the treatment plant cost? Those are some of the things that I would hope that the studies that come out of this, and with some support from the town departments, whether it's DPW or whether it's the assessors or whatever, that you can put some test of sanity and put a range on the town costs so that you can stand up before the town and say, this plan we think is a viable plan, this is the zoning that makes it viable, and then ask for it to be voted. I'm not arguing against voting for it. I'm just saying, what kind of information are you going to give the voters to ask them to vote for this? And I think you need to verify some of the costs, particularly from the town side.
So the committee, I think, is focused on certainly the infrastructure side of that. I think DPW, or water and sewer in particular, I've actually asked Mo about that just in the last 2 weeks, and at the level that he probably didn't understand the seriousness of my question, he indicated that he didn't think that's a problem. So there's work to be done, but some part of that work has to be done on the water and sewer side. There's work to be done in this committee around the estimate of infrastructure cost. The piece that you're calling for around the town's revenue modeling, I'm saying we've gone through that revenue model. And now what you're saying is, yeah, but I think you used the wrong number somewhere.
No,
And
I'm
so,
not saying, I'm saying you don't know if you've used, nobody in the assessors department has looked at the value that's been put on the
so,
property.
okay, so you're suggesting it would be good if the assessors would review the assumptions in the model that the master
Or a
planning.
consultant,
I'm
I
just,
don't care.
Bill, I'm just trying to understand what
Yes.
exactly in practical terms.
Yeah, may I more generally say the following? And we've heard it from water and sewer people. We need to hear it from, we need to hear, it's the town's plan. It's not the Board of Selectmen's plan. It's not the plan of the former, state housing planning. It's not the plan of the new development committee. It's the town's plan. And for it to live or die on its own merit is going to require data points from very knowledgeable people, including public safety, water, sewer, DPW, the town administrator with regard to, financing and the like, the impact on the tax rate. Like I probably already mentioned the school committee. What we're trying to do in the meantime is hopefully, by the way, wisely invest and spend the money that was appropriated at the annual town meeting to get at some of the really big numbers like infrastructure and the like, because, these are the things that without no plan's going to succeed at all, no matter what the configuration or the unit count or the product mix is. I mean, if you can't get water and utilities and roads and the like delivered at some point.
Okay.
So what Gus intimated toward, and the approach that we have been taking, is literally not to fly down the highway, but to slow down at every yellow light and stop at every red light and calibrate, do we have the information we need? And again, not to be precise, but within range. What we would like to be able to say, if we went to a special town meeting, was there's no topic or area of question that we wouldn't have had at least considered where we could give a response like, yes, we looked into this and the range is this. If we have to say, which I hope we don't do, is, gee, that's an interesting topic. We hadn't thought about that. I hope that never happens. And by the way, we're not necessarily advocating any development. I think we're here. I'll tell you what, I think our role is to be inside baseball for the town because we are familiar with how a development gets done. Don't really care whether we do one or not either, but want to help provide consulting advice, if you will, to the town so that you were best informed as we go forward. I mean, like people stop me in town and say, so Ken, what are you going to do up there? I'm not doing anything. I mean, we're studying this for the benefit of the town. I mean, so
let me paint a picture, because this is coming clearer to me now. We have the development committee here, that's the committee, and let me broadly state it, you're the committee that's charged to look at all aspects related to a commercial project on this site. So the actual, infrastructure, all the things that are going to influence the commercial side of this project. This commercial project. Bill is raising issues around what I'll call the town's business model that sits on top of that project, that says, well, whatever it is we're doing there, we need to be confident it makes sense for the town. We have no committee that's doing that. We have no individual here in town that's responsible for orchestrating that conversation. So to Bill, Bill raised several points about different people that should be involved, and we're having a conversation here, and we might even agree with all that, but there is no mechanism right now to bring those people together.
Into like a warrant committee, which is a central body that goes out and solicits input and advice, examines and advises. I mean, we could do that.
So maybe we use the warrant,
We could
go
do
through the warrant
that in
committee.
a sense by getting, the town's input on town-centric matters.
Well, the warrant committee is going to have to review it anyway.
Well, this is
They're
more
gonna
than
review it,
review,
but
this is driving it.
I don't think you can assign it to the warrant committee to be in charge of the level of depth that needs to be looked at.
I'm using us as a surrogate example
Oh, for
where
the warrant.
where we can solicit and assimilate
Yeah.
the data points that are important to assess, not only whether the town's going to invest anything in it, but if we do, is it worth it? Or is that among the priorities of the town?
So one of the things that observing the process for a long time, one of the things that struck me is that there's no town point person who has been in charge of this. It's really been handed to citizen committees. And I'm not sure that that's the best way to get to a good answer. And it may be time for the town to fish or cut bait and hire that professional point person that we need to run this from now to the town meeting. And if it passes at the town meeting, somebody needs to be getting all the information, all the data points ready for the special town meeting. And I agree with, I think that we do need some more data on things. Certainly on the infrastructure, that's just a huge unknown, so.
That's what I'm trying to differentiate. I think you guys are moving on the infrastructure. I'm talking about this other set of issues that have to do with the modeling of town revenue.
I agree
and the
that we're,
modeling of
I
town
think that we're, I
costs.
think Bill's right. I think that the people in town are gonna wanna know that information,
But-
and that we're gonna have answers for
That's
them on that.
fine.
And is 3,800 the right number, or should we be
But
using
who's the
16,000?
one- Or who actually does that? I don't think it's the development committee. I think the development committee's got their hands full trying to simply set up the commercial process here.
Absolutely.
I'm not fighting the issue that Bill's raising. I'm saying, what's the mechanism that gets us there? Because there's this other set of issues that are, for lack of a better term, I'll call it the town business model, about why this makes sense for the town, independent of the project, why this makes sense for the town. How do we get those questions answered?
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, we've already invested a substantial amount in that assessment that the master planning committee did.
And it's a good thing Pat Casey's here, yes.
We can refine that to the extent other people need to vet some of those assumptions. I think if what we're going to do is give the town meeting a range of what it would look like, I don't think it's a massive project to run different assumptions through what that range is. I mean, we're not going to be able to have down to the last school child how many kids are going to be there. We can't have it down to the last number of bedrooms you're going to have and however many apartments are going to be there. I mean, we have to give what the range would be, but I think if this is what's presented to the special town meeting, I think this is what has to be presented to the special town meeting, because there's nobody suggesting that we do anything else. Then what we're asking the town meeting to decide on is whether is this the direction they want to go in. Right, we think this is the best possible plan that preserves the buildings and preserves the layout. And if that's what you want, is the preservation of the buildings and the layout, tell us yes in the zoning. If the answer is no, you don't want that, you want something else, you say no, and then we can kind of go back to the drawing board. And again, we don't have, at that point, a wide range of options, but there'll be a strong message from the town meeting that they don't want to focus on preservation of the buildings, and will focus on something else that addresses these other issues.
So there are two things that will inform that decision. One will be whatever the projections are of what this project could cost the town in terms of infrastructure costs or things like that, which is the project. And the other one is the projection for the taxpayers around the revenue attractiveness of this project. I'm going to, Pat, again, I'm glad you're here, and I'm not pulling you automatically into being a volunteer, but what I just heard you say, I think, is that actually the update of that tax, of the model around the attractiveness for the town, that component, isn't that big a deal. It's just a question of changing some variables, what the incremental cost of students is, and perhaps updating the estimate of the students, running that back through the model again. Maybe at some point, if we have infrastructure costs, there probably is actually on the dip in the town. That's got to be built in there, and then there's a new projection that's updated for the town meeting that literally is just change two variables, add in a different number here, crank the machine, and here's your new number, and that's the information we're talking about for the
So maybe
special town meeting.
so maybe for the school children costs, you can get a range, because you can plug in the 3,800 and the 16,000 or 17,000 per year, and it'll
Well, I think
spit out the
incremental.
range.
The incremental's a different
And-
number than that even, but.
And so maybe that'll get us there.
If that piece is a simple thing, then everything I've been balking at here.
But certainly something
is a
like
big deal.
the sewer and the infrastructure costs, I mean, I thought when I was chair of the Board of Selectmen, so over a year ago, I thought I had tasked Mo Goulet to get us that number, and apparently he didn't understand that.
Well, they have been working on that number. I don't think it's as easy as getting that number, right? I don't think it's as simple as I'm going to sit down in an afternoon and figure it out. I mean, I think a lot of
I
it
thought he was going to get it
depend
from
on
Park.
exactly
That
how
he was going to get in touch with Park and bring the
exactly
people
how the
together
developer
and
proposes
get it.
to do that. So,
Somebody needs to be following that along and making sure that happens. That's the problem.
So I think actually they are moving ahead. The thing was, the first thing they did is let's figure out the leakage issue, because if we figure out the leakage issue, that
That'll
also
solve
gets
the
us,
water.
that gets us
Yeah.
insight against our license, and that gives us insight
Because there's
into
two
what
issues.
capacity is.
There's the infrastructure issues
And the
capacity
DEP
issue.
permitting.
So, which it has to be a part of it. I mean, I don't think, because you can, I mean, it's obviously hugely complicated to actually project what the impact in the town's gonna be, but it's not hugely complicated to come up with the best possible information we'd have on that front before a special town meeting. We're just not gonna be able to give an answer.
This committee, I think, can run a few sensitivities to get to the point of zoning with regard to utilities, with regard to infrastructure and all that stuff. But until this goes out to the development community to actually put real numbers behind it, we can't do all the sensitivities. We could get 9 different committees to remodel it 9 different ways. You're gonna get a giant range, until you actually get it, and until those developers who are really good at getting outside funding for some of this stuff, until they're able to start placing their applications to the state, federal government, wherever else that stuff may come that could offset some of these infrastructure costs, we won't know. And I think before that second step, I think the goal would be to run every last sensitivity there is to get a more refined, this is the cost of the town, or this is cost neutral, or somebody else came in with a better idea that still falls within the parameters of the zoning you passed, and hey, maybe we're gonna lose half the buildings or most of them, but this works. And then I think the town has a final say in that disposition.
And maybe that's just another variable that we asked Pat to run for us. If the utility is gonna cost 25 million, here's what it is. If it's gonna cost 8 million, a third of, as somebody said, then here's what it'll be, so we can get maybe another range.
Right, so I think, as a committee, we all agree that getting better information before going to any special town meeting is very important. We also feel like getting to the ultimate stage where developers are coming in, making a competitive proposal, and you're gonna find out if it's 334 units or 320 or 362. We're only gonna get that if we pass the zoning. So I guess, one of the things that we've talked about a little bit is if you go and you pass the zoning and then you don't get proposals you like and you don't go forward, what's the downside there? Obviously, we had a special town meeting that I guess we didn't need to have because we passed zoning that's not gonna get activated, but what's the downside to the town of moving forward in that direction if the control still rests with disposing of the parcels to one or more developers, commercial, residential, whatever it may be, making specific disposition decisions, awarding bids? And if you don't like them, you don't have to award it.
I see no downside at all. I mean, I think we have to give the town meeting a chance to vote on what's gonna happen up there. And it sounds like where we're heading towards is an up or down vote on essentially the zoning for the master plan and the preferred scenario. And if the town meeting says, nope, we're done with that, then we're done with it. And we'll move on to something else. We'll work on a different proposal for there. We'll deal with the costs of mothballing the buildings and decide what else we're gonna do. I mean, I don't have I have had I've got concerns about the viability of the preferred scenario in the master plan, and as I said, I don't think it's worthy of any subsidy from the taxpayers of Medfield. If other government entities and their taxpayer bases are okay with it, more power to them, and they can help us out in that front. But I'm fine to let the people of the town have, I think they ought to have and need to have a vote and a voice on this topic and at a town meeting. And I think this is what we have at this point, and I hope that the Master Planning Committee will participate in making the case for why this plan is in the best interest of the town and is what we ought to do.
So one of the other things that I've been thinking about is the need for the flexibility, the flexibility in the zoning that you kind of alluded to, Todd. And because I can remember the mass development person who did North Hill came and spoke to the town, and that was one of her big points, that there should be a lot of flexibility in the zoning because issues come up, basically, and things out there. They had some sort of industrial user that showed up and just wanted to put a plant in the middle of it, and they thought, oh, well, this will work, okay, we'll give you this space. And there's and I think about it because there's specifics in the plan that I guess I didn't completely agree with. I mean, I thought the number of CCRC units that they proposed were too few to be financially viable. And that's because I was involved with a CCRC called LaSalle Village, and we started at like 150, 160 units, and it was kind of small. to be financially viable, so we got it up to around 200 units, and it worked out much better. The number of CCR units here was like 50 or 60 or something. It was pretty small.
The folks in Franklin said the same thing to us. They look back at their state hospital conversion, and they say the only reason that they are successful, and they're looking back at it now, alleging that it is successful, was that they maintained some flexibility throughout the process. I mean,
Yeah, and that was Franklin, did you say?
yeah.
Oh,
So
No, Foxborough, I meant Foxborough.
Foxborough,
when we're
okay.
talking about the endorsing the vision and the plan, we're talking about the vision, and
Yeah.
not, it's in
Not the
stone, and
specifics,
you're gonna do
yeah.
32 of these
Yeah.
and 6 of those, because
Yeah.
I think it's not clear it's
Yeah.
gonna play out that way, and you
Yeah.
don't wanna have
All
to
right.
go back to another.
You're not gonna put
Town
that in
vote.
zoning, you're not gonna put numbers like that in zoning.
Yeah, okay.
That's gonna be the disposition.
Yeah.
Teresa?
Well, yeah, I guess that was Teresa James. That was my question is, did the developers read the zoning draft that was part of the master plan? And did they have any specific suggestions? Because that flexibility of zoning was very keen on our minds, and that's why it was presented as overlay, and there is flexibility in that. It's not so restrictive. And so, I mean, there's sections, yes, but, you know, it's not like an overall, like here you can put anything anywhere, but there's sections, and was there any feedback on that?
Well, so I would say some developers read that and others didn't.
Okay.
We had some very specific comments about, you know, these buildings are gonna need to be ADA compliant. That means elevators. If you've got a 3-story building, you know, if you could do
Right.
4 stories somehow or add, it's a lot more cost effective. But I think, you know, everybody recognized it's a draft, and I think, you know, Sarah can speak to the idea that what would be presented at special town meeting on zoning would build on what has already been done and isn't necessarily the exact same document that was published in draft.
It would start out as that draft, and so the planning board is required to hold at least a public hearing prior to a town meeting. So that could get into a whole nother realm of issues associated with that, like a zoning article needs a sponsor. You know, we need to make sure that the right education and outreach is in the right spot, you know, i.e. plan versus zoning. When we have our public hearing for zoning, will that be interpreted as a presentation of the master plan? I, again, don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but we do need to have re-engage the consultant to bring the zoning to the special town meeting, because we need someone to carry that.
Re-engage which consultant?
McCabe,
To do what?
the zoning piece, get the zoning to special town meeting. Present,
To draft, so what you're saying,
Yeah.
you need technical help drafting the
Yes.
proper zoning.
yeah, getting it there. But
And then the other question, I just to think about, we don't have to decide tonight, is whether we would be only presenting, I mean, it sounds like the answer to this is yes, but whether we would only, because I'd always thought of the town meeting on this issue as more comprehensive. I'd always kind of thought of it as the whole shebang in one town meeting, and that as part of that, in alternative to the development scenario, you'd have a financing article for the cost of non-development. And so you'd have an alternative, here's what it's gonna cost, not the development, here's what it would look like, this is what the financing scheme would be. Based on Steve Nolan's advice about a year ago, I've sort of shifted on that and thinking, well, we could just do the zoning, just straight up zoning now, and then deal with that financing alternative at a different time. I do think in the information that we present to the town meeting, I think we have to give some sense, though, of both of the costs, our long-term costs of building ownership, the short-term costs, and what the different financing mechanisms would be for addressing that. I mean, I don't think we necessarily need to have another article on addressing that, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that it's not a free decision to say, no, we don't have to develop it now. We do have time beyond October to talk about this, but in that information package, we have to provide the information on what those alternatives would be. Because obviously,
And
the
the
answer
cost
is
of
no on
them.
the zoning, the likelihood will still be there'd be an alternative development proposal, likely less development, and sort of putting aside the buildings and coming, which we know from the RFI response, there'd be plenty of interest in that. But then there'd still be the alternative of, here's how the town's gonna have to finance whatever that liability number is. And again, one of the unfortunate things about this, as so many other things, is that with some exceptions, that people's view of the underlying facts tends to adjust based on what their preference is for the future of the hospital. And so I think we have to do our best to put that aside and come up with the best information that we can, and neither highball it nor lowball it, but give the best information we can.
Right, so we
I don't want to lose sight of that fact,
Well,
that
we're
at some point we're
anticipating-
going to have to, people are going to have to actually decide either to develop it or spend money to pay for the cost of not developing it.
But as part of the work we intend to commission in the short run, and so results would be in hand for
Yeah.
the zoning meeting, would be a number on what demolition or remediation costs of the buildings
And over
would
what
be.
period of time? Because we have from John as well, his analysis of the buildings, the costs of sort of mothballing and what that cost would be over a, 10 to 12 year time period, which has got to be a part of it as well.
Okay.
Give us some sense of what the window is to make a
So
decision.
are you viewing a potential second town meeting if the zoning passes somewhere down the road to authorize the disposition?
Yeah. And my thinking of it would be that we would do it, and again, this is what I brought up at the last meeting, that if we did the special town meeting in October, you could actually line up to do the disposition special town meeting the night after the annual town meeting in May. And you'd have that window in there. I think that's kind of how I thought about it, if you get the endorsement for the zoning. Alternatively, you'd probably have a special town meeting to deal with whatever, hospital plan 2.0 is, which I think would be much simpler.
And in between those two town meetings, what would have to happen is the RFP requests would have to go out. Those would have to come in, they would have to be evaluated, we'd have to be satisfied that we have probably two or more viable developers that seem both qualified and seem prepared to build the kind of a project that the master plan called for in order to be able to go to that town meeting. If we don't have anything that comes in that looks any good, then we don't need the town, we kind of have an answer on Plan A. Yeah.
But I think Plan B, what you're talking about, when you're gonna do the alternative about mothballing, is we need to include what the annual maintenance cost is in addition to the.
Well, not just the annual maintenance cost, right? You have the total cost of, you say demolition, the total cost of demolition,
Yeah.
right? And over what period of time is that total cost gonna be spent? It's probably, based on what John has said, that if you spend the money he proposes, that demolition window might be 30 years, right? So it's not demolishing them all in a year. And so here is the cost over 30 years of gradually mitigating it. And if you never did any development, right? The likelihood is that the alternative would be a smaller development that pays for itself, that's not as pretty, that doesn't preserve the buildings, but, takes the town's financial. And that's what, if the town says no, I think that's where you end up. You end up with a smaller development on a portion of the property that just deals with the financial issue, if that's where we go. But we don't need to get into that. But I'm talking about not just the annual maintenance costs, but the actual liability risk of owning the buildings, the fact that they will have to be taken down at some point if some developer is not going to rehab and redevelop them for us. So they've got to be taken out, what that cost is, what's that period of time? Is it $20 million over 30 years? Is it $30 million over 15 years? Is it whatever that number is? And then how do you finance that? Is that financed by bonds? Is that financed by some version of what we did with the Municipal Building Stabilization Fund, where you have a steady amount each year that's kind of gradually mitigating those buildings, which you can shut off if you send, there's all sorts of different options if we say no. We've got to give some sense of what those total costs are, and then what the potential options would be, because those are really the variables. What's the total number, and then what's the window?
I've mentioned this at several meetings before whenever the zoning issues came up. So I went through the zoning, I made lots of comments on them. I didn't necessarily agree with some of the items that they put in some of the areas, but they're fairly consistent in the uses, and I think they're very flexible. And I'll say again, I may not agree with all of the uses, but they are very flexible. So I don't particularly have an issue with going out with the master plan, the zoning, the way it stands now.
They're flexible within the footprint of the building.
Yes.
Not flexible over the whole site.
Right.
Yeah, well,
And it's that inflexibility on the location of potential.
but that's what you're going to get
that
back in a
drives lot of the
response from
cost.
somebody who
It
says,
makes
you
it
know,
much more expensive.
yeah,
It'd be a much
you know,
less expensive
yeah,
project if it was more flexible.
maybe I want to use some of the reserved land, maybe I don't want to use some of the reserved land, maybe I want to do something. That stuff will come back, but it's a starting point. It's something to go out on the street with. I would point out in terms of the life of the buildings after some kind of stabilization or whatever, there are buildings that up there have been abandoned for 40 years, and they were not taken care of in the 40 years. The fact that they're not lying in a crumpled heap now is some testimony to what you could do if you decided not to immediately do something and to stabilize the buildings and make them last. I'm not advocating for it, I'm just pointing it out. I mean, and the buildings were built in what, 1898 to like 1893. Yeah, so I mean, they're 100-plus-year-old buildings that some have been abandoned for 40-plus years, and they're still standing, so.
Yeah, the way I look at it right now is that the demolition scenario, that's a baseline. We are not interested in any project that puts us worse off than the demolition scenario. That's why it's important to have it now. Now, if this project as envisioned doesn't come to fruition, then we have another decision to make that says, okay, is our best alternative the demolition alternative, or is there some, modified, probably reduced scope development that, I imagine there would be, because we could probably pull the thing apart if we simply gave up on the buildings or gave up on some substantial number of them. The property is still beautiful property, so you could probably do something that would be better than just flat out demolition and now you have a field.
Would we get those answers as a result of your planned work?
Yes, that's the
You
intention.
will. So what we've labored under here is no alternative plan, no other plan than what has evolved over these years into the master plan for the hospital has been referenced, because there has been no other serious effort at saying, what do we do if the town doesn't approve this, right? So I think your committee has done great work, and all for the $100,000 and the spending thereof that you intend. But I hope we come up with the answers so that if, and I expect the town meeting will not approve rezoning, because there are so many questions, and there's flexibility simply is an open door for developers to go for more and so forth. But I understand what's in play here. But if we get turned down for rezoning at the town meeting, then what are we left with? See, I had hoped that over the years we would come up with some alternative potential uses there. And I can see some of them, as all of you can, but those are in abeyance until we settle this question of the relatively soft support that committees in town have given the master plan, and which, of course, came back as pretty much non-workable on some of your responses from developers.
I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with that? No. It's workable if they want to take it on themselves and spend their own capital. Otherwise, it's workable if and only if they get all the tax credits involved, and if they get some modifications for the town, and if we're flexible, sure. You can get developers in here to do it, but at a cost. And what I'm looking at is down the road, what are the costs that are consequential to approval of this? And those are monumental. So, but you answered my question. I appreciate the discussion here tonight. Obviously, I agree with many of the points that have been made by Mr. Massaro and Mr. Macucci as well. But we'll see. But this is a very, very difficult item to get 2/3 approval of in the town, because there are so many specters of just terrible things happening as a result of it. And to say we're going to do a little bit at a time, we can say a little bit of a time as long as that is defined up front. But to leave an open menu here of what can happen is tantamount to defeat at town meeting. Thank you. Thanks for the time.
Just Todd, a little bit of a caution on the demolition costs that you said you're going to look into. The master planning committee tried to get those. They were told that they couldn't put out an RFP for a couple of the buildings or 4 of the buildings or something of that sort to get a hard cost, because they weren't allowed to put an RFP if they weren't intending to actually demolish. So that the master planning committee basically had a series of different estimates. DCAM's, I think, was like $15 a square foot, was it, or something, or 8 or something?
Well, they started out with, again, now, you gotta realize, we're talking 5-6 years worth of, aged information here, but when they took down the part of the state hospital in Worcester, they paid $16 a square foot prevailing wage. Their estimate of what they would have paid if they wasn't a state agency doing it, and in fact was a developer or somebody else doing it, was somewhere around $6. And then the next time it went out for a consultant, C-Cubed or whatever, took a look at some of the buildings and everything else, and they came back with numbers that seemed to reflect what was going on in Boston as opposed to what was going on out here. They came up with something in the neighborhood of $32 a square foot. We went back again and talked to DCAM. They insisted that the $16 number was a good number. And then the last number, I think that's in the master plan, is $20? Yeah, it's $20 a square foot. As far as trying to get a bid, there were 3 buildings at least that had been deemed extremely poor. There's at least one building that's been in every plan to be demolished, and that's the food service building. And John and I, with help from Christine and everything else, we actually got a spec written for demolition for the buildings, but the town couldn't go out for the bids. So we're kind of like 4 years, 5 years away from knowing what a verifiable kind of number is. I don't know how you get it. I mean, if nothing else, it would be valuable, I think, when you're talking about what's the value of the car I'm trading in or whatever. It would be nice to know what a developer is actually going to pay for his demolition, if you can ever find that out. Is he paying $6 a square foot, and when he knocks out his demolition costs out of what he's willing to give the town for the buildings, is he knocking out $6, or is he saying it's $16 or $22 or $32 a square? I mean, that's a valuable number to me to know. I don't know if you're there now at that stage of the game, but it would something in the long term would be good to know. That's it.
Plus demolition wouldn't be for the developers we're talking about here, demolition wouldn't be a major component of the project. Remediation would be a major component.
Well, you gotta remember, they're talking gut rehab is basically what they're talking for all the buildings, which essentially is leave the outside and take everything out of the inside.
Did any of the work that went on at Foxborough comparable that you can get some guidance from?
I mean, there must be other state hospitals. I mean, Westboro demolished their hospital, right? I mean,
Well, DCAM's demolished tons of them, and that's why they had good figures.
yeah. And that would be the best estimate, is what other buildings like this have been demolished. What they paid.
So I think this is in part what we're trying to avoid, right, if we get to a special town meeting, is a lot of historical reference points that are hard for people to evaluate.
Anecdata? You don't know any anecdata?
Gus, you mentioned the remediation costs are upfront to demolition. Even if you said we're going to demolish all these buildings and then develop, it's 4 to 5 years just to demolish, because of the upfront work that has to be done inside the buildings first.
Pat's question is,
Go
who
ahead,
is this
Pat.
Pat Casey who's going to do all this work that's been assigned to him tonight?
Todd, quick question. You mentioned earlier in your discussion that some of the developers were, concerned that it might be tough to deal with the town. And your fourth point on recommendations was a single point of contact, if I got that correctly. Is that in answer to the developer's concern, and is that necessary and sufficient, or is it just simply necessary, and are there other things that other measures we'd need to take to get developers comfortable with working with us?
Well, The first thing I would say is they weren't commenting specifically on the town of Medfield when they were talking about the need for a point of contact. They were really referencing other projects they had done, and had said that it had made certain developments much more difficult when they were dealing with, 3 or 4 different people at the town as compared to one person who could quarterback things and arrange for meetings and kind of go act as a facilitator. A project of this size, I think it's an open question, once you've got that person hired, if that one person would be enough. But nobody was asking for 2 points of contact, so.
Fair enough.
I just wanted to ask, because Pat did something like 30,000 different models on a variety of data points. Is there agreement about the data points that need to be resolved before a special town meeting on zoning can happen?
What I heard was that there were 2 questions. One was the incremental cost for students, and 2 was the number of students. And the other issue was update on infrastructure costs. Those are the 3 things. There is no agreement on data points. In my experience in the last 4 years, is no matter what the estimate is, someone who doesn't like the implications of that estimate will make the case that that's the wrong data point. So that's partly why I'm pushing against the data points without completely pushing against the data points. If we can keep it simple and we make the adjustment and it stays simple, that's great. If we can't keep it simple, then what happens is we go back into paralysis by analysis mode, and we're having this discussion about zoning changes in a year from now, which is the thing that I'm really pushing against. I don't want us to go down, the rabbit hole here all the way to the completion of this thing. I do want us to move. I think the way Ken put it is you get to each stoplight and yellow light and red light, and then you see where you're at before you take the next step. But I don't see any other way for us to move ahead, and I don't see any point to stretching this out. So that's kind of where everything I've had to say tonight that's what's really been behind it.
They were clear about what they needed
I think.
do with the money and the studies, because there was a lot that was discussed.
Well, and so that was why I made the point. I think this committee, as it's configured right now, is focused on getting the data around what I'll say, all of the commercial costs, either direct or indirect commercial costs associated with the project. That's why I differentiated what Bill was calling for, which was the town's model, revenue model, as being a completely separate thing from what they're looking at. And the last point I made is, and right now, nobody has stewardship of driving that analysis unless it's so simple, it's just a matter of us figuring out what the updated student projections are, the incremental cost is, and then, we will get informed by the infrastructure cost. If that's it, then we just have to convince Pat or his evil twin brother to recrank the
I mean, a
cost.
considerable amount of work was put into that from Pat, with Martha, with the Warren Committee folks. I mean, there's a lot of effort.
Yeah.
The Warren Committee is going to want to know what those answers are when they evaluate the proposal, so.
And part of me hopes that maybe Martha Fester or somebody would still be willing to stay involved, because I think she and Jack in particular had their hands around your model, Pat, in a way that most of the rest of us wouldn't.
Yeah, so we had a little sidebar on the way in tonight, and we agreed, I think, at least on a quick conversation, we agreed it would be a relatively simple matter to, upgrade the model as it is with new data that becomes available. Okay. I've always insisted that we get a separate set of eyes on it, which is why we really wanted the warrant committee studying it. Perhaps somebody involved directly in town finances ought to be another set of eyes on it, so that everybody's just comfortable that we're representing things correctly. But it should be a relatively straightforward thing beyond that.
So then maybe it's not as big. If that's all true, yeah, I totally agree. That's information we should have for that special town meeting. The best information we can provide is what we want to provide.
Okay.
I want to go back to the question and the discussion around the developers, and did any of them give insight into single developer, multiple developers? Because as I hear us saying, we'd be a 2-phased approach here of passing the zoning in the fall, and then I think from a town's town person's viewpoint, they would want to know what that next step is. If I vote yes tonight and I pass the zoning, what's that next step and what would that disposition process look like? And I know that's a pretty squishy area. So what's the input so far?
Well, and we all did separate meetings with developers, so Johnny may have some input as well. But in terms of the meetings that I participated in, I think, the developers will tell you kind of at the beginning, they want to be the master developer and this is all going to be, the best way to do it. But as you really talk to them, they recognize that some of them, the strengths are rental housing, renovation of historic buildings and not single-family condominiums or commercial necessarily. They can do all of that, but that isn't really their core business. And then you have other developers who focus on single-family, maybe single-family age-restricted, who aren't necessarily a proponent of the historic renovation, in part because that's not something they do. So I think in general we heard openness to collaboration with others, and that in a way that would allow the town to decide which parcels were most important and should be prioritized, and could conceivably start certain phases in that fashion without necessarily activating the entire site at once. And there's some risks in there because you don't want them to cherry pick just the projects that make the most sense for them. But I think given the scale of the project, they were recognizing they'd rather be involved and focus on a piece they were good at than have an all or nothing type approach. You have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, one piece that I got from some of the more conventional developers was that they're fine with that coming in. They seem to be more receptive to partner. You give us this parcel, I'm going to build what we typically build. And the question was asked, well, are you okay building in front of an old hospital? Is it going to hurt your marketability if you have an old hospital behind what you do? And they're like, no, what would hurt is if we thought nothing was ever going to happen back there. If we built a property and we had an old state hospital behind us and nobody had any, it's just going to sit there for the next 30 years. They said that's the only thing, but other than that, they would have no problem having their conventional housing with historic preservation behind them or intermixed or whatever. They would want to see that the wheels were turning for the entire.
Yeah, I would say sort of similar feedback on the Arts Center. I think there was some concern early on that developers would perceive, don't take those buildings away until we figure out what we're doing. But I think, the majority and maybe actually all of the developers felt like this was a placemaking opportunity and a way to have activity up there, and not necessarily buildings that would be conducive to apartments anyway. So.
I will say to that point, and to answer your question for myself, this is probably the issue on which I feel the strongest, in that, the idea of, that we're going to hire a single point of contact and maybe two, what that means is the town is becoming the master developer of the property. And I think we are not equipped to do it. And so I don't think we should be selling this to the town meeting as though you're going to have a series of opportunities over the next 10 years to, weigh in on this. I think if we're going to go the route of the master plan, my strong view is what we're voting on is a fee simple disposition of the entire property to a developer to develop within the confines of the zoning, and it becomes that developer's responsibility. Even if they're going to subcontract to these other developers to do pieces of it, it's the responsibility of that developer whose skin is in the game and who is an expert at this to manage that process and manage these other developers. We are not a town that's going to be or could be equipped to manage that.
So what you're saying is you would mandate a teaming type approach,
that is
right?
non-existent now.
So what you're saying is in an RFP context that the responses would have to address everything, and whether they chose to do that by teaming with another developer.
It could be a joint venture of 3 developers, but somebody's going to be in charge and somebody's going to own it who's not us when we dispose of the property.
I'm going to push back a little bit on you, Mike, and again, I'll defer to this committee, because if you guys say that's the way to go, I pull it back. But to answer your question, Teresa's question a little differently, and the one thing that I heard when you talked to developers, and some developers said, we do historic, renovations and things like that, but we really don't do single-family. I look at this, and I think we may have a decision around what we actually try to put out to a major developer. To me, the carcass in the room has always been the campus. All those buildings that we're trying to preserve as much as we can, with apologies, John, it's not carcass in a bad way. He's sitting there, the thing I've been working on all these years, and he's called it a carcass. No, my point is that those are buildings that are there. We're trying to keep them. They have to be renovated. It's not just greenfield development. If they weren't there, and we had the cottages in the southeast corner of the property, and it was all just green fields, I don't think we would be that scared of figuring out how we wanted to develop that property that we needed to have a single master developer.
We wouldn't be developing it at all.
Well,
I mean, if the buildings weren't there, we would not develop it at all.
Well, there's an economic value there. We could discuss that. But my point is, the campus is the actual thing that we need somebody who knows what they're doing to do a good job with. If it turned out that the developer who wants to do the campus basically says, "Meh, I don't really like these cottages on the southeast side," I wouldn't be afraid of us as a town taking on a project. It would be like the Hinckley property, to have something done with that property. So I
Sure,
don't
if
want
somebody would buy the buildings and nothing else, then.
Yeah, well, that's
have
what
to-
I think that
what
was
I've
their
heard
point,
is-
who I spoke with was.
Yeah, that's easy.
There are some developers that
Yeah.
are primarily interested in that campus. And so I'm not saying, so we shouldn't have, I'm just saying that there is an option there on how much we package with a developer. The real nut we need to crack is that campus. The other land we have is within our.
That I agree with. My assumption is, I mean, the rest of it is easy.
Yeah, that's my
The
point.
grass, the blank land is easy.
Right, that's
We,
my-
we can sell land to somebody. I mean, right now, there's 48 houses being built up on Hospital Hill.
Right.
We've got no single point of contact for the town. We
Right.
had no committees, we had no meetings, and they're doing it just like that. So we could easily do the exact same thing, that, again, in theory.
In
Yeah.
theory, in theory.
You don't have to hire anybody new. Maybe we should have, Sarah. Bad example.
Yeah.
Bad example. But in theory, that can be done. And so it's the campus that creates, so yes, if somebody wanted to buy the campus and we had to sell the grass to somebody else, that we could certainly do that.
My only
I just think it's
when it comes
unlikely.
time to an RFP, I wouldn't automatically say it has to be the entire property we bought.
But it's gotta be
that's
all the buildings. We can't be hanging on to some of them and managing
Yeah,
the
totally.
development process and deciding, okay, next 2 years, we're gonna do this section over here, and no, we're not gonna do that section. That should be some professional to figure that out, who owns the land after we've sold it to them.
Right, well, I mean, I guess some of it is self-selection because who responded to the RFI, but, I mean, we have 3 developers that are among the best east of the Mississippi. They've done 40, 50 projects, complicated, like this.
That's exactly
And
who we wanna sell
They
the
want
land
the
to.
core campus, I mean, that's what they see as a great development opportunity.
Do you envision a wider base of developers that you'd be going out for with the RFQ?
Yes.
So it's not, wouldn't just be concentrating on the responses that you got?
No, we were very clear in the RFI that if you didn't respond to the RFI, you weren't precluded responding later.
Okay.
And that responding to the RFI and, giving us a bunch of free
Yep.
information didn't give you
Didn't
some
get any
kind of
advantage
leg
or
up.
anything?
Right.
Yeah, understand. Okay, thank you. By the way, I want to thank, I would second the compliments that Mr. Harney made for the committee. So I think you guys done a good job.
Thank you, Bill.
And I've tried to help as best I could, not make
Perfect
obstacles, but,
attendance. You missed tonight's meeting at 6 o'clock. You would have had a perfect attendance also.
The quick, you guys had me thinking about the original development committee. An act of the legislature created 7 trustees in 1892, and 2 of them had to be women, and 3 of them comprised the original building committee. And I've seen the original documents in Westboro from the original development committee. They still exist. The land was bought for $25,600. It was 400 acres. The original budget for the buildings was $500,000, and in 1890 dollars, that was $14 million. The project was completed for $700,000, which was about $20 million. in today's dollars. It went over budget. Legislature approved the additional cost. And there was a change by the contractor in the type of bricks that were used during the construction, which caused the architect and the contractor to both be fired. And they went on to continue the project with the lesser quality bricks. So when you look at the admin building, you'll see water cast bricks, and the other buildings are sand cast bricks. And the sand cast bricks were cheaper, and they got caught. So, little history.
Okay. All right, I think we're done. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. I think we're down to administrative issues pretty much now.
Under action items, we're gonna hold Maurice's request for the Sursage contract for water and sewer treatment chemicals. We have a series of Sursage contracts to do. We're gonna do them all at once.
Okay, so postpone that one. Just, I guess, Deputy Chief John Wilhelmy announced his retirement this past week, effective June 22nd, so we.
So yeah, it's listed as an action item because you're officially accepting his
Yeah,
resignation and retirement.
So I guess.
We don't have a
vote
choice.
on that?
You don't have a choice. He's told me you don't have a choice. It was just,
Should we vote on that?
you should vote to accept his.
So moved.
A second.
I assume we do this with regret and appreciation for John Wilhelmy's service to the town. All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep.
And I think the town administrator should put together a proposal for some sort of way of recognizing
Yes, I'm working with the current police chief on that now.
John's service to the town and
Okay.
all of that.
So you request to vote to authorize me to sign the Mass DOT project eligibility notification for the Charles River Bridge, Route 109?
Yeah, so this is just the next step in the process. They're notifying you that it is eligible for
That's great.
funding, so
Right.
we acknowledge
There's-
the
I saw
eligibility.
there's a signature
Right.
block for me.
Even
so
though they acknowledge they may not fund it at some point, but we're acknowledging that it could be
if they
funded.
do,
If
we'll
they
accept
do,
the
we'll
money.
accept it.
Okay, they have
Yep.
a
So
motion.
moved, so
Second.
moved.
All those in favor?
Yep.
Aye, okay. Next one down is the,
This is
well,
the.
yeah, go ahead. You-
So this is the 2020 Census New Construction Participation Program. Sarah actually has taken the lead in working on the 2020 census for us. And she's actually participating in this, and her and Yvonne updated me tonight that they've actually started this process and have already supplied the parcels. So filling out the paperwork is a formality, and we'll designate her as the contact person.
Great.
Do we actually need to vote and approve it, or?
I would vote and approve it, but they've already started the work on it.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Let's see, request to authorize me to sign the letter of support for Mayrock Development LLC.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yep.
Aye.
Approved, okay. Next page. Commission Michael Weintraub resigns from the Transfer Station and Recycling Committee. Again, I guess we need to vote to accept that.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yep.
Approved, aye. Approved. The fraud risk assessment policy, Christine, what do you?
Pete and Mike, you were gonna review Gus's comments that he had given you. If you're okay with them, we'll incorporate them.
You okay with them?
I'm fine with them. Gus and I reviewed them and,
Fine with them.
okay,
Yep, I'm fine.
okay.
Okay, so you're gonna incorporate those?
So I'll
issues?
incorporate it. You can sign it at the next one.
Okay. Okay.
Actually, if you don't normally sign the policy, so if you want to vote to accept it, you can do that tonight, and we'll just make the
With-
changes and
with
then
my-
upload it on the
my
website
changes
with your
made?
changes,
Okay,
if that's okay
sure.
with everyone.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I don't think it's necessary to carry it on the agenda again.
That's fine, yep. Let's see, licenses and permits on the consent agenda. The Gazebo Players, Medfield, will perform their production of All's Well That Ends Well at Rocky Woods Reservation, July 20th and 21st. Request permission to post signs on from July 8th through July 21st, advertising their 18th summer production. And the Medfield High School Science Olympiad Club requests permission to hold fundraising car wash behind the town hall on Saturday, June 1st, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And I assume that's not a conflict with any other of the multiple, so we're good to go. Unless there's discussion and a motion to accept the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Yes, sir.
Aye. Okay.
So I think our new car wash policy will go into effect for the fall car wash
It will
season.
go for the fall wash car season. I just received a copy of Needham's car wash policy, which is very quickly going to become Medfield's car wash policy.
Nice. Thank you, Needham.
Right.
Yes.
Let's change the name.
So we're not the first town to encounter this issue.
We are not, but of the 15 towns I was talking to, we will be the second to have a policy.
Really?
Most of them have done away with them altogether.
Let's see. Next item is meeting minutes.
I circulated my suggested edits.
I saw your edits. I have only had a chance to review one of them, and I had enough issues with it that I realized, I think we have, Pete's comments about getting this stuff a little bit cleaner before we see it is a good point. So Pete gave you some edits. I've only looked at the November 6th, I gotta get my glass on, November 6th minutes. There's a little bit of editorial stuff, but the hard part is to remember something that happened 6 months ago. First off, I have no idea whether that was the date when we did these things, but then as I went through it, the logic on some of these things didn't work for me. So on page 3, this is just to give you an illustration of what I'm getting at. Page 4, at the top, we're talking about the for this Arbor Day, a tree was planted at the cemetery and a bench was also installed. She continued remarking that the plan is to gather at the cemetery for the official Arbor Day photograph at the spot of the new tree. Selectman Murby read the proclamation to the listening audience. It may be my intermediate memory that's gone. I don't remember doing that.
You did.
I did.
Yeah.
I do not remember. I remember the one we did at the COA, but I don't remember that one. Maybe, so.
You read it at the meeting.
Oh, I read it, okay.
I think
so
you read it at the meeting.
I
I'll
may
have to go back and
read it
look.
at the meeting. I'm sitting here going, I don't remember ever going to the cemetery, similar to what we did with the COA. If you're saying I read something here.
No, I
At the
think
meeting.
it was at the meeting, and then you actually read it at the cemetery. No, Maurice read it. None of you could attend that year. Maurice read it, but I think you read it at the meeting because you were not going to be able to read it at the.
Okay, well, that makes sense to me, because I just, for the life of me, couldn't remember having gone to the cemetery in front of a tree and a bench, reading a proclamation.
I didn't remember
Back
that
in
we-
November.
You are not in the pictures, I assure you.
Thank you. Well, so the wording there then is just confusing.
I didn't remember that we'd planted a tree in the cemetery, so.
Okay.
I remember you reading about Nebraska.
Yeah, no, that's a whole different thing.
J.
It was
Stanford
just,
Withington, or whatever the name is.
I mean, the COA in front of the highway department, I will never forget that. That was a life-changing experience, but I did not remember going to the cemetery. And
I
was getting
recently walked by the trees that the town planted in front of Montrose and thought about back to when I was at that one, so that is memorable.
Then on the next page, this is kind of, we've got some errors, because under the second paragraph, the Master Planning Committee charter, which is actually, I think, the Development Committee, not the Master Planning, oh, no, this was the townwide Master Planning Committee charter, but it said that I had a conversation with Todd Triovenko, it was Phil Stashenko, and so.
I knew that was wrong. I didn't know who it was.
That's what
It's
it
Philip
was.
Stashenko, yep.
And then what threw me off.
I wondered where you were talking to Todd.
Yeah, and now that makes more sense, because then I saw something about how I met with the Development Committee, and at first I thought you were talking about the Development Committee up there, where we were still appointing people, and then reporting how I'd been at a committee meeting down below, but now that makes more sense. So I will give you this one. This is the only one I'm actually able to react to, and I just suggest we defer all these to.
And I had some edits on this as well, on top of Gus, and hopefully you can understand what I said.
Just move it to next, we're meeting again.
You're meeting next
week,
Tuesday.
And we probably, I think Pete made some comments about timeliness of minutes, and I think that's valid.
I mean, I think we had a very, a lot of upheaval over the winter.
Yeah.
I think as we get into next year, I think if we get it on just getting them at the next meeting, just so we remember, because I didn't go back and watch any of these videos, like some of these discussions were extensive and you know, I didn't see anything that I objected to, but I'll look at them again.
Yeah, what happens is that if it's that long ago, and you spot something, go, yeah, I didn't do that, and it's like, oh, what else? You know, in order to review minutes, when you actually realize that, no, this isn't just a rubber stamp, and it was 6 months ago, it's like, it's time consuming, so. Okay. Town administrator update.
So I just have two things. One, we were honored last week. We hosted 9 different classes of 3rd grade on the Medfield History Tour on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And we had a fantastic time with them. In fact, I think a few of you should be worried about your seats in about 10 years. You're gonna have a few that are very interested in running for the Board of Selectmen, especially when the gavel was brought out. The other thing, I was notified today that we are in violation at the Council on Aging for our handicap parking spaces. We do not have a handicap van spot, nor do we have signs at every handicap spot that we have. They're painted on the pavement, but they are not painted at the, we do not have the freestanding signs at the things. Somebody took several pictures of them and reported us to the Architectural Access Board. So we have, I think it's 10 or 14 days to respond with a plan before we're starting to be fined $1,000 a day. So Amy Colleran and Gary Pelletier, the building inspector, will formulate a plan with Maurice about what work we can do internally with DPW to avoid those fines. So, and that's all I have today.
I work with a former member of the Architectural Access Board, the state architectural, who seems to know everybody there.
Oh.
So, and she reports to me that generally they're pretty good at working with people.
That's what Gary and Amy both said. And they agreed, they went back to look at the plans when the Council on Aging was originally constructed, and it should have been caught then that there should have been a van spot. So that part will be easy to fix. It's putting in the freestanding signs that'll be a little more expensive.
I thought Pete was gonna say he knows somebody who's gonna be able to pull some strings for us.
Don't say that.
Just joking. Okay. Okay, selectmen report.
So just, I'm sure this will be echoed by my colleagues, but thank you to the Memorial Day Committee for a wonderful parade yesterday. It was a great turnout of marchers and members of the Legion who did a great job as always. It was obviously a little different without Bill Mann. I think there was a nice tribute to Bill, and I thought Michelle Doucette and Frank Iafallo did a nice job filling in for Bill. But he was missed by everybody there. But it was a great day, a great Medfield day. The speaker was poignant and excellent, and it was just great. It's always one of my favorite days of the year in Medfield.
And it was nice how complimentary he was to his hometown that he hasn't been in for probably 25 years.
Yeah, I thought the fact that he wanted a flag flown over town hall in his retirement was.
I didn't know if you told the story of how he came to be our speaker.
He did.
Okay.
He did. Yeah. Richard pulled him in exchange for a flag.
That's all I had.
So the Medfield Foundation has this new initiative, the grist mill, and so that the people at the Medfield Foundation were curious about the grist mill. So the grist mill opened up to the Medfield Foundation last week and gave us a tour. And it is, for anybody that's interested, it's a fascinating building. And they're really doing very, very interesting things there. So I recommend it to anybody. The other thing is I went to the Eagle Scout Court of Honor for a bunch of there were 3 scouts, and they actually, it was very nice for the troop that they grouped them for us, because one of them actually was got in his Eagle Scout last fall, I think, and but it was Brian Schubert, Nicholas Iannone, and Isaac Popper. Always a nice event. One of the interesting things that came out of this was that I met Isaac Popper's grandfather, who explained to me that he's the construction manager for the town of Needham, and I said, "What's that?" And he proceeded to explain to me that he has saved the town of Needham about $1 million plus in the past several years, because he acts, instead of their hiring an owner's project manager, he basically does that role for them, and they do enough construction that, and so I think that's something that we might consider. And as we're talking about a point person for the state hospital, this person could perhaps, where they're a construction person, might have some skills that would fit there too. So. And that's it.
I don't really have too much to report. I was on the road last week with 2 college graduations. There were 2 sunny days. They went well, had a good time, and all kids are now out of school.
So congratulations to you guys.
Downsize quickly.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet. But, no, it was a good, very enjoyable. I think that's it. Nothing on the informational items that needs to be
Nope.
talked about. I wonder
I
if,
think the biggest one is the Medfield Press is changing its name to the Medfield Transcript.
Field transcript. That sounds so lofty.
I object.
And that's it. That's all I had.
Okay.
Nice to see that we got almost 16 grand in SREX credits for our solar photovoltaic.
Yep.
What were they supposed to be? Just kind of curious.
So
The market goes up and down.
I had Joy run numbers for me today. So since we put them in, we've collected 175,901 at the wastewater treatment plant, which goes into the enterprise fund. And at the public safety building, since we put them in, we've collected just over 12,000, which goes into the general fund revenue.
Those are just the SREX.
Just the SR credits.
That's great.
Well, we're going to be back here in a week as things stand. I think our
We're back
next
on
meeting is
Tuesday.
next Tuesday. So
At our usual time of 7 o'clock.
at our usual time of 7 o'clock.
Yes, we will confirm all appointments before we have the meeting.
Oh, that's the final thing I wanted to move, was that we change our auditor.
We'll go to a second reading on that. Isn't that how the state legislature does it? And give them a second chance. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
Sure.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Good night, folks.
You're watching Medfield TV.